He was stripped of his inheritance and sent to die. The last governor of the cursed fort held out for 3 weeks. He was given 10 women in gray robes to serve as his labor force, Category C property, and only he could see what no one else in this world could read. A sealed legend burned above each of their heads. Raynar Falk opens his eyes in a foreign body and does not recognize his own hands, slender, pale, with dirt under his bitten nails. The wagon shakes so hard his teeth chatter. 2 lives are merging in his mind. The memories of a 19-year-old nobleman lay over those of a 28-year-old engineer from Seattle. The lines don't match, but the outline is already taking shape. He clenches a stranger's fist and hears the joints crack. The body is weak. The body is someone else's. But the body is alive, and that means he can work with it. He looks down at the scroll bearing 3 seals. The Lord's 3rd son is stripped of his inheritance and sent to the Gray Frontier to command Fort Dorn Hollow. 10 Category C properties are placed under his command. He rereads the line twice, then he raises his head. 10 female figures sit on the floor, gray robes. A single chain runs through iron rings on their ankles. Not a single one looks at him. They sit like people who long ago stopped hoping for anything good. And then the system comes to life. A panel flashes before his eyes. Class assigned, Mentor, Level 1, Maximum Level 1. Raynar blinks. Not a knight, not a mage. An administrative class that's laughed at in the capital. They give this to village elders, to retired fencing instructors, to those the system has marked as servants. And he's stuck at Level 1 forever. In a world where the number above your head decides everything, he's been given a 1 for the rest of his life. He closes the panel, and then the skill activates. True status. What he sees makes him freeze. A standard window hangs above the nearest girl's head. Level 3, Laundress. But beneath it, a second line flickers, one that no one in this world can read. Potential 99. True class sealed. Holy sword. He shifts his gaze to the next one. Maid. Potential 99. Healer of life. Next. Day laborer. Potential 99. Archer of the wind. He looks at them one by one and sees the same thing. Potential 99. All 10 of them. These aren't slaves. These are 10 sealed legends that someone deliberately dumped in a junkyard. And here, the engineer inside does what he always does. He starts counting. 10 people. 0 resources. A ruined fort on the edge of the cursed lands. Winter in 4 months. Monsters from the whispering forest. And himself. Level 1. Forever. But he has 10 people with a potential of 99 and a class that knows how to unlock that potential. This isn't a disaster. It's a project. A bad project. 0 budget. Tight deadlines. A team that doesn't even know him yet. But he's had worse projects before. At the factory in Everett, they gave him a broken production line and people everyone had written off. And then the first thing he did was one simple thing. He taps on the side of the wagon. The driver turns around, red face, indifferent eyes. Raynar asks how far to the fort. 2 days, and adds that the Lord had better pray. The last governor of Dorn Hollow lasted 3 weeks. Raynar nods. He asks about water. The coachman points to a barrel under the bench. Raynar pulls it out, opens it, sniffs. Musty, but not spoiled. In the corner, he finds a sack. Inside is dry grits, enough for a couple of days if he's careful. He measures out a portion by eye, but an engineer's eye is precise. He turns to the 10 figures. None of them are looking at him yet. He doesn't wait. He mixes the grains with cold water in the pot he found. There's no fire, but soggy porridge is better than nothing. He stirs it, waits for it to swell. He takes the first bowl. The smallest one is sitting on the edge, 14 years old, maybe 15, so thin her wrists are visible, eyes on the floor. He crouches down. She shrinks back. He doesn't touch her, just sets the bowl on the floor and speaks, quietly, calmly, as if to a person, not to Category C property. He says her name is Sunny, that he read it in a scroll, that she has to eat slowly or her stomach won't handle it after the starvation, that tomorrow he'll find something better. Sunny looks up. For the first time in a long while, someone has called her by name, and something is trembling. The class seal is cracking with fine fissures, like ice on a spring river, and it shatters. The system displays a message. Seal removed, holy sword, level available for growth from 1 to 99. Sunny doesn't see this. She looks at the bowl, then at him, and tears roll down her cheeks silently, like someone who has forgotten how to cry out loud. He gives her time. He stands up, carries the next bowl. He approaches each one, calls out a name, sets down the food, says something simple, that the food is for them, that he won't hit them, that there will be a roof over their heads in the fort. One looks at him with distrust, another with empty eyes, a third with fury. The tall, dark-haired one takes the bowl in silence. The sharp-featured half-elf with pointed ears stares intently at him, as if memorizing his face, in case she has to hit him. He doesn't look away. He sets the bowl in front of her and says her name is Ariel and that the food isn't poisoned. The coachman grunts over his shoulder. He mutters that the Lord is wasting supplies on livestock. Raynar is silent. He sits down. He closes his eyes and counts. 10 seals. He has already removed one. Each is removed not by a spell, but by an action that heals a specific pain in a specific person. So he needs to learn each one's story, to understand what broke her, and to give her what she never had. Not gifts, not promises. Something real that will mend the crack all the way through. With Sunny, the name worked, just saying the name out loud. He doesn't yet know what will work with the others. The wagon jolts along the broken road. Gray hills flash by behind the curtain. The land is barren. The trees are crooked. On the horizon, the whispering forest grows dark, from which creatures emerge at night. Raynar looks at it through the eyes of an engineer and sees not a curse, but a sight. Neglected, devastated. But a sight. There is soil. There is water. There is also stone for building on the rocky outcrops. The forest is nearby. That means wood. That means fuel. That means it's not just possible to survive here. It's possible to build here. On the second day, the wagon drives up to the ridge and Raynar sees Dorn Hollow. The fort stands in a hollow between 3 hills. The walls have sagged. One tower has collapsed halfway. The gate hangs by a single hinge. The grass in the courtyard is waist-high. The roof of the main building has caved in 2 places. He takes stock. The foundation is intact. The walls are made of local stone. They're thick enough. It can be restored if there are hands to do the work. There are hands, 10 pairs, and his own. Weak, but capable of holding a tool. The driver stops the wagon at the gate. He jumps down, opens the back door, nods toward the fort. He's not going any further. Raynar jumps down first, helps Sunny down, then the rest. The chain hinders their movement. They take small steps, like old women. Raynar looks at the chain, then at the coachman, asks for the key. The coachman shrugs and tosses the bundle into the mud. Raynar picks it up, approaches Sunny. He unlocks the shackle. The iron ring falls into the grass. Sunny looks at his leg as if he can't believe it. He moves on to the next one. He removes the chains from all 10, one by one, silently. Some flinch at his touch. One pulls her leg away. He waits. Then he unlocks the shackle without touching her skin. By the time the last ring falls, the coachman is already driving away. He doesn't even look back. Raynar stands in the middle of the courtyard. 10 freed women stand behind him. The wind whips dust across the stones. The fort is silent, and he speaks aloud. First, they need a fire, then food, then a roof over at least one room. He says that today they won't think about tomorrow. Today they'll eat and sleep in the warmth, and tomorrow they'll start working. He doesn't ask if they agree, he just walks inside. And 3 seconds later, he hears footsteps behind him. First one, then another, then all 10. In the cellar, grain is rotting and broken barrels are lying around. But behind a collapsed shelf, he finds a nearly full sack of oats. Next to it is a pot of dried-up honey. He pulls out both. There's dry firewood left in the fireplace of the main hall, so there will be a fire. He lights the fireplace. He cleans the pot. He draws water from the well. The water is clear, a good sign. He pours in the oats, a drop of honey, and waits. 10 girls sit against the wall. The fire lights up their faces. Not a single one speaks. He ladles out the porridge. There are only 6 bowls. 3 are cracked. He quickly patches one up with clay. The first 6 eat. They wash the bowls. Then the remaining 4 eat. Raynar eats last. From the pot, the leftovers. He notices that Cassandra, the very tallest, dark-haired one, notices it too. She is silent, but her gaze shifts by a fraction of a degree. That is enough. That night, Raynar is the last to lie down by the fireplace. He waits until everyone is asleep. He takes out a scroll and memorizes the names. Sunny Park, Mei Chong, Ariel Winter, Leah Hale, Eunice So, Cassandra Vale, Irene Duarte, Nora Grimm, Hannah Ray, Vivian Lowe. 10 names, 10 stories he doesn't know yet, 10 seals he must break. He closes his eyes. Tomorrow is his first day on the job, and he knows where to start. On the roof. Morning at Dorn Hall began with rain. Water dripped through holes in the roof and pooled on the stone floor. Raynar was the first to get up. His body ached after a night on the stones. He looked at the sleepers, 10 figures by the wall. Some curled up in a ball, some lay straight as soldiers. Cassandra slept sitting up, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed. Even in her sleep, she looked like a person ready for battle. Raynar didn't wake them. He went out into the courtyard. The rain was cold and light. He walked around the perimeter of the fort. He took stock. The walls on the north side had sunk by 1/3 of their height. The eastern tower stood firm. The western one had collapsed to the ground. The gate needed to be dismantled and rebuilt. The well was in working order. The courtyard was littered with debris and overgrown with grass. The stable was empty, but the roof was intact. That meant the stable would serve as a temporary storage area. The main building, 2 stories. The lower floor is stone. The upper floor is wooden and half rotten. Raynar decided immediately. The upper floor must be dismantled. The wood must be sorted. What is usable should be used to repair the roof of the lower floor. What is rotten should be burned. He went back inside. The girls were already waking up. Sunny was sitting and rubbing her eyes. Me stood by the wall, examining a crack in the stone with professional interest. Ariel sat in the corner, sharpening a scrap of iron she'd found somewhere against a stone. Raynar stood by the fireplace and did something that no one in this world had ever done to a slave girl. He held the morning briefing. He explained it simply, without long speeches. The fort was destroyed, but not dead. They had 4 months until winter. During that time, they needed to repair the roof, restore at least half of the walls, clear the courtyard, organize food storage, find a food source besides the remaining oats. He spoke and looked at their faces. Most listened in silence. Yuna, a quiet girl in broken glasses that she held on her nose with one hand. Yuna listened more attentively than anyone else. Her lips moved. She was counting along with him. Raynar assigned the work, not according to the classes the system had shown, but according to physical abilities. Leah, tall and broad-shouldered, with the scorched hands of a former blacksmith. He tasked her with clearing out the top floor. She nodded, not a word. She just nodded and left. He suggested that Cassandra survey the perimeter and map out the weak points in the defenses. She raised an eyebrow. She looked at him with a lingering gaze. Then she said one word. "All right." And she put so much condescension into that word that it would have been enough for an entire speech. May was tasked with examining everyone for illnesses and wounds. He gave Yoon a wax tablet found in the ruins of the office and asked her to record everything they found in the fort, every item, every resource, an inventory. Ariel was tasked with scouting the immediate surroundings. She looked at Raynar with her usual sharpness. She asked if he was afraid she would leave and not come back. Raynar replied calmly. He said there were no more chains and that she could leave whenever she wanted. But he added that beyond the fort, for 10 leagues in every direction, there was nothing but the whispering forest and hostile villages, and that if she knew of a better place than this, he wouldn't hold her back. Ariel clenched her jaw. She turned and set off on her reconnaissance. She would return in 4 hours with 3 corpses and a map of a stream 2 leagues to the south. But Raynar didn't know that yet. Sani stayed by his side. She hadn't strayed more than 3 steps away since he'd called her name. Raynar noticed this. He didn't shoo her away. Instead, he took her with him to inspect the cellar. The cellar was deep, 3 levels. They had already seen the top one, rotten grain and broken barrels. The middle level was locked with a rusty grate. Raynar found a piece of scrap metal in the ruins of the stable and picked the lock. Inside, they discovered an old armory. Weapons. Rusty, useless. But the metal could be reforged if there was a forge. Raynar counted the blades. 14 swords, 9 spearheads, 24 arrowheads, 3 suits of chainmail so rusted they crumbled at the touch. But metal is metal. The lower level of the cellar was flooded. The water came up to his knees. Raynar stepped into it without hesitation. The cold pierced his legs to the bone. He felt along the walls with his hands, and he found it. In the far wall, behind a fallen stone slab, was a hiding place. A small chest lined with copper. Inside lay 3 items. A pouch of silver coins, 23 of them. A scroll bearing the seal of the previous governor, and a small glass vial containing an amber-colored liquid. Raynar held the vial up to the light. The system reacted instantly. An elixir of accelerated growth, extremely rare. Grants a subordinate a +5 level boost with a single use. Raynar tucked the vial into his inner pocket. Too soon. First, he needed to figure out which of the 10 needed it most. When he emerged from the basement, soaked to the waist, Sunny was standing by the stairs with an armful of dry cloth. She'd found it in one of the rooms. Raynar took the cloth. He looked at the girl. She didn't look away, for the first time. He nodded at her and said thank you. She smiled slightly, just the corners of her lips. That's how people smile when they're trying out a forgotten movement. By noon, Leah had cleared out 1/3 of the top floor, all by herself. She worked silently and methodically. Raynar went upstairs to take a look. Leah was prying up the rotten boards with her bare hands. The skin on her palms was so calloused that the wood didn't leave splinters. She sorted the boards into 2 piles, usable and unusable. Raynar stopped beside her. Leah didn't turn around. He said she was doing a good job. Leah froze for a second. Then she continued tearing off the board. Raynar noticed that her movements had slowed slightly, not from fatigue, from the fact that she was listening. He said that once they found clay and built a forge, she would need a smithy, that he could tell by her hands that she was a blacksmith. Leah stopped. She turned around. There was something strange in her eyes, as if he had spoken a word in a language they weren't supposed to know here. She replied briefly. She said she had been expelled from the royal smithy 3 years ago, for being a woman. Raynar nodded. He said there was no royal forge in Dorn Hollow. There was only his forge, and he needed a blacksmith, not a man or a woman. Leah turned away, but Raynar noticed that the mark above her head had shifted. It hadn't cracked yet, but it had shifted. By evening, Ariel returned. 3 rabbits, a map of the area scratched onto a piece of bark. "There's a stream," There's clay along the bank. There are deer tracks. There are tracks of a large beast, too. Something from the whispering forest is moving along the border, no closer than 3 leagues, for now. Raynar took the report as a routine update. Ariel looked at him, waiting for something. Maybe an order, maybe praise, maybe a catch. Raynar said that meat was good and asked if any of them knew how to gut game. Ariel snorted. She said she was a half-elf and that she could gut a rabbit faster than he could blink. She wasn't bragging. She was testing his reaction to the word half-elf. In the capital, people with ears like these were sold into slavery. Raynar didn't react. He just said, "All right," and asked her to show Nora how to butcher the carcass. Ariel narrowed her eyes. Then she went over to the fire. That evening, they ate rabbit stew with the leftover oats. Raynar cooked it himself, not because he couldn't delegate, but because in the early days it was important for them to see his hands at work. Not the hands of a master, the hands of a man who does the same things they do. May sat nearby and reported on the group's health. 2 were seriously emaciated. Nora had an inflammation on her ankle from the shackles. Hana had a cough that could become a problem if she wasn't kept warm properly in the coming days. May spoke dryly and precisely, like a doctor, because she was a doctor. Only the world didn't know it. Raynar listened and took it all in. After dinner, he sat by the fire and unfolded the project map. The system helpfully drew a translucent grid right in the air in front of him. 10 points, each with a status indicator: fatigue, hunger, fear, trust. Raynar looked at these indicators. Trust was at 0 for almost everyone, except for Sunny. Sunny's trust was at 12 out of 100. 12. For a single name spoken and 2 bowls of porridge. Raynar closed the map. 12 is a lot. 12 is a start. Before going to sleep, he went around all the rooms. He checked that the windows were closed, that the fire was burning steadily, that water had been drawn for the morning. Little things. Everyday, unremarkable little things. But Cassandra stood in the doorway and watched. She saw everything. And when Raynar walked past her, she quietly said that the previous lord had never left his room after sunset. Raynar replied that he wasn't a lord, he was a manager. Cassandra didn't understand the word, but she remembered it. On the 3rd day, Raynar faced his first real problem. Not monsters, not the cold, not hunger. People. More specifically, one particular person, Ariel Winter. In the morning, she found one of the rusty blades in the armory. She sharpened it on a stone, and when Raynar came down to the courtyard, she stood before him with a knife in her hand and hatred in her eyes. She said she knew who the Fawkes were. She said that 3 years ago, Lord Hamish Fawke, Raynar's uncle, led a punitive expedition to Greenlog, a village on the border of the Elven lands. Her village. He burned 32 houses. He killed those who hadn't managed to escape. He took those who had. Ariel was among those taken. She was 15. She saw the roof burning above the room where her younger brother slept. And now another Fawke stands before her, and he's smiling and handing out porridge and saying all the right words. Raynar stood motionless. The knife was 2 steps from his throat. Level 1. If she strikes, he'll die. He has no defense, no evasion skills, nothing. Behind Ariel, he saw Cassandra shift silently to the right, ready to intercept. Raynar nodded almost imperceptibly. "No, don't interfere." He spoke, calmly, without excuses. He said he knew about Greenlog, that the memory of the body he wore contained that day. At dinner, Father had told the story of how his brother had restored order at the border, and everyone had nodded. Raynar said he wouldn't ask for forgiveness on his uncle's behalf because forgiveness for someone else's fire was worthless. Instead, he offered something else. He said that once Dorn Hollow was back on its feet, a portion of the land's income would go to Ariel, personally, so she could decide for herself what to do with it. If she wants to leave and rebuild Greenlog, let her go with the money. If she wants to stay and build here, let her stay. This isn't a gift, it's compensation, and it's her right. Ariel didn't lower her knife. She stood there, breathing heavily. Then she said he was lying, that all lords lie. Raynar nodded. He said she was right. Lords do lie, so he'll make it simpler. He turned to Yuna and asked her to write it down. Yuna took the tablet. Raynar dictated. 10% of the land revenue from Fort Dorn Hollow is assigned to Ariel Winter as compensation for the actions of the Falk family against the settlement of Greenlog. Signed, Lord Raynar Falk. He took a piece of charcoal from his pocket and signed the tablet. He handed it to Ariel. She looked at the wax tablet, then at Raynar, then back at the tablet. The knife dropped. Not immediately, slowly. Ariel took the tablet. She turned and walked away, without saying a word. Cassandra approached Raynar. She said quietly that he had just given away a tenth of income that didn't yet exist. Raynar replied that it was the cheapest deal of his life, because the alternative was a knife to the throat. Cassandra looked at him with a long, appraising gaze, and for the first time in 3 days, there was no condescension in her voice when she said she would go check the perimeter. Ariel hadn't spoken to him all day, but she hadn't left either. That was enough. By the evening of the 3rd day, May came to Raynar with bad news. Hannah Ray, the girl with the cough. She had gotten worse. Her fever had risen. May said that without medicine, pneumonia would set in within 2 days. She had knowledge of herbalism, but there were no herbs. She listed what she needed. 3 plants. All of them grew on the edge of the Whispering Forest, where the beasts roam. Raynar thought for 10 seconds. Then he made a decision. Tomorrow at dawn, he would go himself. May objected. She said he was a level 1 and that it was suicide. Raynar replied that he couldn't send one of the girls. They weren't trained yet. Sunny was the only one with an unlocked class, but she was a 14-year-old girl who, 3 days ago, had heard her name for the first time in 2 years. He wouldn't send a child into the forest with monsters. May looked at him. Then she said he was an idiot, and that she was going with him, because she was the only one who could tell the right herbs from the poisonous ones. Raynar agreed, and added that Cassandra would go 3rd, as backup. Cassandra, who had heard the entire conversation from the next room, walked in and said that this was the first sensible order in 3 days. They set out before dawn. Raynar, May, Cassandra. Cassandra had the only decent sword in the arsenal. Ariel had sharpened it to a razor's edge. Ariel handed it over silently, not to Raynar, to Cassandra, but she looked at Raynar as she did so. That look meant something. Raynar didn't try to figure out exactly what. Now was not the time. The Whispering Forest began 2 leagues from the fort. The trees here grew strangely. Their trunks were twisted like ropes. The leaves were gray-green. Almost no light filtered through the canopy, even in the morning. May walked ahead. She knew what to look for. They found the first grass quickly. May cut off a bunch. She hid it in her bag. They found the second one half an hour later, deeper in the forest. Raynar noticed that Cassandra had started moving differently, more tensely. Her hand never left her sword. The 3rd plant grew by a stream, almost at the very edge of the deep thicket. May crouched down and began gathering it. And at that moment, Cassandra spun around sharply. A wolf emerged from the thicket, but not an ordinary one. The system above its head showed level 18. Its fur was black with a purple sheen. Its eyes were white, without pupils, distorted. A creature from the depths of the forest that shouldn't have been so close to the edge. Cassandra stood between the wolf and the others, sword at the ready. She was level 4, class sealed. She didn't stand a chance against a level 18. Raynar knew it. So did she. But she stood her ground. Because in 20 years of service, her body had learned to stand between the threat and the one you're protecting. Raynar thought frantically. The project map flashed before his eyes. He saw the indicators. Cassandra. Fatigue, average. Physical condition, above average. But her class is sealed. Her strength is a tenth of what it could be. May. Her hands are occupied with herbs, useless in combat. He's on his own. Level 1. And then he remembered. Skill transfer, his mentor skill. He could demonstrate a move, and the system would turn his observation into a subordinate's skill. He wasn't a fencer, but in Raynar Falk's memory were years of watching his older brother's training bouts. He had seen thousands of strikes. He couldn't reproduce a single one, but he could demonstrate. Raynar stepped forward. He stood next to Cassandra. She hissed for him to step back. He didn't step back. He raised his hand and slowly demonstrated the movement. An overhead strike with a step to the right. A classic move from his older brother's training. The system reacted. Skill transferred. Cassandra Vale. Steel Crescent technique. Basic proficiency level. Cassandra felt it. Raynar saw her eyes widen. She grabbed the sword, and when the wolf leaped, she stepped to the right and slashed. Not clean, not pretty, but it hit. The blade sliced across the beast's neck. The creature howled and recoiled. Blood trickled down its black fur. The wolf bared its teeth, but it didn't attack again. It backed away. The wound was serious. A minute later, it turned and vanished into the thicket. Cassandra stood there, breathing heavily. She turned to Raynar. Her face wore an expression he couldn't read. She asked what he had done. Raynar replied that he had passed the skill on to her. Cassandra said that was impossible, that the mentor class doesn't pass on combat skills. Raynar shrugged. He said that apparently his class didn't work the way it did in the textbooks. May gathered herbs. They returned to the fort before noon. By evening, May had prepared a decoction. Hannah drank it. By morning, the fever had subsided. May had sat beside her all night. Raynar knew this because the project map showed 2 dots next to each other until dawn. One with a recovery indicator, the other had a fatigue indicator at its limit, and a trust indicator that had risen from 3 to 19. Raynar sat by the fireplace and thought. Skill transfer worked on Cassandra, even though her seal hadn't been removed. That meant some of his abilities worked even on those who were sealed. If that was the case, he had more tools than he'd thought. The project map, true status, skill transfer, the learning curve. 4 tools that individually were worth little, but together. Raynar smiled. For the first time in 3 days in this world, the engineer inside him saw a system, and the system was working. The first week was over. Raynar stood on the roof of the eastern tower and looked down at the fort. The courtyard had been cleared. Debris was piled up against the western wall. The top floor of the main building had been completely dismantled. Usable planks were stacked in piles. 2/3 of the roof on the lower floor had been patched up. It was still leaking in 3 places, but those were minor issues. The stable had been converted into a storage room. The well had been cleaned out. Raynar looked on and saw progress. Small, but real. A week ago, it had been ruins. Now it looked like a place where one could live. He went down to the courtyard, morning briefing. They were used to this by now. 10 women stood in a semicircle, Yuna with a wax tablet, Cassandra with her arms crossed, May with a sack of herbs slung over her shoulder, Ariel off to the side, always off to the side, but she was there. Sunny stood closest to Raynar, like a small, serious soldier. The other 4, Irene Duarte, Nora Grimm, Hannah Ray, Vivian Lowe. They were just background for now, silent, cautious, waiting. Their seals hadn't budged even once. Raynar announced the plan for the week. First, the smithy. Without a smithy, they couldn't repair the gate. They won't be able to forge nails. They won't be able to make tools. Ariel found the clay for the furnace. They have stones for the foundation. He needs Leah, and he needs a day to draw her a blueprint. Leah raised her head. Raynar saw her eyes light up, quietly, almost imperceptibly, but they lit up. Second, training. Raynar explained the logic. There are 10 of them. The fort stands on the edge of the whispering forest. The creatures come out at night. The twisted wolf they encountered was level 18. There will be stronger ones. The neighboring baron, Victor Holland, surely already knows that there is a new lord in Dorn Hollow, and he will surely send people to check things out. They need to be able to defend themselves. Cassandra will train them. She's a former captain of the guard. There's no better fighter in this fort than her. Cassandra accepted this without objection, but she clarified. She said she could train them, but it wouldn't do much good while the girls were only levels 2 through 4. They wouldn't stand a chance against any real opponent. Raynar nodded, and he explained the learning curve, his skill as a mentor. As long as they were in his settlement and under his guidance, the experience gained from training would multiply. Cassandra listened. The skepticism on her face was thick and unmistakable. Raynar said he was asking for 1 week. If there was no progress in a week, she could call him a fool, and he wouldn't be offended. Training began that very day. Cassandra put them through their paces in the courtyard. Basic stances, basic strikes, basic blocks. There weren't enough swords. They trained with sticks. Raynar watched from the wall. The project map glowed before him. He could see the indicators for each one: fatigue, coordination, skill progress. And he saw how the learning curve worked. What usually took a month, Sunny completed in 2 hours. She repeated the movement Cassandra had shown 10 times. On the 3rd try, it was clumsy. On the 7th, it was clean. On the 10th, the system assigned her the skill. Cassandra stopped. She looked at Sunny, then at Raynar, at the wall. Her face expressed something between bewilderment and alarm. By the end of the first day of training, Sunny had gone from level 1 to level 4. May from 2 to 3. Ariel, who had been training separately at the other end of the yard with a bow made from a branch and rabbit sinew, went from 4 to 6. Raynar was writing down the numbers. Yuna was writing next to him. She calculated faster. She looked up and said quietly that such a rate of growth was not found in any of the treatises she knew. Raynar asked how she knew about the treatises. Yuna replied that before she was enslaved, she'd worked as a copyist in the Kronheim library. She'd transcribed 112 books on system theory. Raynar paused. He looked at her intently. Her true status displayed Potential 99, True Class, System Archivist. The girl who had memorized 112 treatises on system theory was sitting before him, and 3 years prior, she had been used as a living photocopier. He asked calmly, "Yuna, what do you think? Should we split the training into morning and evening sessions with a break in between, or is one long session better?" Yuna froze. The tablet in her hands trembled. She looked up at Raynar as if he had spoken in a dead language. Then she answered, slowly, choosing her words carefully. She said that based on the fatigue curve she had observed, 2 short sessions would be 30% more effective than 1 long one. Raynar nodded. He said, "That's what we'll do." Yuna blinked. He saw the seal above her head tremble. For the first time in 3 years, someone had asked for her opinion, and had done as she said. On the 4th day, Raynar set to work on the forge. He spent the night drawing a blueprint on a stretched piece of leather. Rain Park's engineering memory provided him with the general principles: horn, anvil, bellows, quenching bath. He didn't know how to build a medieval smithy, but he knew how to organize a workspace, and he knew the most important thing. He wasn't building a smithy for the fort. He was building a smithy for Leah. He called her over. He spread the blueprint out on a stone in the courtyard, and he said it was a rough draft, that he'd drawn it based on standard dimensions. But standard dimensions for a man 5 feet 8 inches tall, and Leah is taller, broader in the shoulders, with a different grip. And he needed her to adjust the blueprint to fit her, because it's her smithy, and it has to fit her like a glove. Leah stood over the drawing. She was silent for a long time. Then she knelt down and began running her finger along the lines. She adjusted the height of the anvil, the width of the passageway, the placement of the bellows. She worked intently, and her sun-darkened hands moved across the drawing with the tenderness with which other women touch fabric. Raynar silently memorized every change. When she finished, he said the blueprint was approved. that they would start building tomorrow, and that he needed a blacksmith's apron. He would ask Vivian to sew it. Vivian, who had been a seamstress before her enslavement. Leah asked what size. Raynar replied, "Your size. Leah, yours. Not standard, not men's, not women's. Yours." The seal above Leah's head cracked. Not all the way through, but the crack ran deep. The system indicated partial removal of the seal, class sole blacksmith, access restricted, level available for growth from 1 to 40. Raynar understood. Leah's seal wouldn't be removed by a single action. She needed more. She needs time and space and the right to be who she was born to be. This isn't instant healing, it's a process. By the end of the first week, the fort had changed, not radically, but noticeably. The roof was repaired, the courtyard was clean, the walls were inspected and marked for repair. The foundation for the forge was laid. Training sessions are held twice a day. Sunny is at level 8, Ariel is at 10, May is at 6. The rest are catching up more slowly. Their seals are silent. Raynar isn't pushing them. He knows that each will open in her own time, when he finds the right key. On the evening of the 7th day, Raynar sat by the fireplace. Yuna sat down beside him. Silently, she handed him a small board. It listed the fort's entire inventory, every item, every resource, sorted by category, with notes on their condition. Raynar read and nodded. It was flawless work. He told her so. Yuna blushed slightly and replied that it was just a list. Raynar shook his head. He said it wasn't just a list. It was the foundation. Without this list, he couldn't plan. Without planning, they wouldn't survive. So this list saves lives. Yuna was silent, but Raynar saw how she pressed the little board to her chest, like someone holding something precious for the first time, something of her own. That night, Raynar lay awake, counting in his head. 7 days, 3 seals in motion, 1 completely removed, 1 partially, 1 had begun to crack, 7 remained intact. There was enough food to last 2 weeks if they rationed it. Ariel brought meat every other day, but winter was approaching and the game would retreat deeper into the forest. He needed a vegetable garden. He needed a smithy. He needed a wall. He needed so much that just listing it all made his temples throb. But the engineer inside Raynar knew the main rule. Don't try to do everything at once. 1 task at a time, 1 problem at a time, and every day, 1 step closer. The end of the 2nd week, the smithy stood, crooked, rough, made of unfired bricks and stones held together with clay. But it stood. The forge was working. The bellows, sewn by Vivian from rabbit skins, pumped air. The forge was a block of stone hewn flat, not perfect, but Leah looked at it and her hands trembled, not from the cold, from impatience. She took the first piece of rusty iron from the arsenal, placed it in the forge, fanned the coals, and when the metal glowed red, she struck. The first blow in the Dorn Hollow smithy. The sound echoed across the yard, and all 10 women stopped and looked toward the smithy. Leah didn't notice. She hammered, steadily, rhythmically, like a person who hadn't breathed for 3 years and finally took a breath. By evening, she had forged 6 nails, crooked, rough, but 6 real iron nails. Raynar took one, turned it over in his hands, and said in front of everyone at dinner that Leah had forged the first nails of Dorn Hollow, that without these nails the gate would not stand, that without a gate the fort was no fortress. That meant Leah had begun today to turn ruins into a home. He spoke simply, without fanfare, like a man reading a report. But 10 pairs of eyes were watching Leah, and for the first time in her life, those eyes were not looking at her height, not at her broad shoulders, not at her scorched hands. They were looking at the blacksmith. Leah lowered her head, but not out of shame. She was hiding her face, because it was doing something unfamiliar. It was smiling. The seal above Leah's head cracked, deeply, almost to the core. The system updated. Seal removed. Class, Sole Blacksmith. Full access. Level available from 1 to 99. The next morning, a man came to the fort. Raynar spotted him from the tower. A man, middle-aged, thin, in tattered clothes, a sack on his back, a knife at his belt. Level 11. Class, Scout. Raynar went down to the gate. Cassandra stood behind him, hand on his sword. The man introduced himself as Graham. He said he was from the village of Old Ford, 3 leagues to the southeast. The village elder had sent him to see what was happening at the fort. The last governor had held out for 3 weeks. Then they found him by the wall, headless. Creatures from the forest. The village elder wanted to know who to bury this time. Raynar didn't respond to the provocation. Instead, he invited Graham inside. Cassandra tensed. Raynar gestured that everything was fine. They walked through the courtyard. Raynar deliberately took him the long way, past the cleared courtyard, past the fenced-in vegetable garden, past the smithy from which came the steady thud of a hammer, past the training ground where Sunny and Ariel were practicing their paired stances. Graham watched. He said nothing. His eyes took in the same things any village scout would: walls, people, weapons, order. Raynar led him into the main hall. He sat him down at a table and placed a bowl of hot porridge with meat in front of him. Graham looked at the bowl, then at Raynar. In the villages of the Grey Frontier, they didn't give food to strangers. It was a luxury. Raynar sat down across from him and began to eat, as if it were an ordinary lunch with a colleague. Graham hesitated, then he picked up a spoon. Over the meal, Raynar asked questions. He didn't interrogate, he asked. How many people were in Old Ford? Graham replied that there were about 60. What they lived on, farming and hunting. How things were with the beasts. Bad. Worse every winter. Last year they lost 2. Was there a blacksmith in the village? No. There used to be one. He died 2 years ago. Since then, they've been fixing tools as best they can. Raynar nodded. He was taking it all in. Una sat in the corner and wrote down every word. When Graham finished eating, Raynar stood up. He walked over to the shelf. He took out a freshly baked loaf of bread. Hannah had baked it that morning from flour that Ariel had traded with a traveling merchant for 3 rabbit skins. Raynar handed the loaf to Graham. He said it was for the village elder, and that if Old Ford needed a blacksmith's help, Leah could repair their tools. Not for free, for food, or for a helping hand. A fair trade. Graham took the bread. He looked at Raynar with the expression of a man weighing his own assumptions, and he left. Cassandra approached after he left. She asked why he had given away the bread. They didn't have enough themselves. Raynar replied that the bread was worth 200 grams of flour. But the information Graham would take back to Old Ford was worth 10 times that. Because Graham would tell the village elder that things were in order at the fort, that the new lord was feeding the people, that he has a blacksmith, that the girls are training, and that the lord is offering trade. In a week, the village head will send someone else, and in a month, he'll come himself. This isn't charity, it's marketing. Cassandra asked what marketing was. Raynar smiled and said he'd explain later. The 3rd week brought changes. Leah was now forging every day, mails, hinges, tip caps, staples. The quality improved before their eyes. Her skill level rose from 1 to 9 in a week. The learning curve applied to crafting skills as well. Every blow of the hammer granted experience. Every finished item granted more. Raynar stood nearby and demonstrated techniques from memory. Not blacksmithing techniques, he had no blacksmithing skills, but the skill transfer worked differently than he'd thought. He could pass on not a specific technique, but a principle. Temperature control, consistency of the strike, inspecting the workpiece, engineering principles that the system translated into blacksmithing skills. Ariel brought news. To the southwest, 2 days' journey away, there was an abandoned quarry. If the road were cleared, stone could be transported. The fort's walls would become twice as thick. Raynar approved the reconnaissance. He sent Ariel and Nora. Nora was the most inconspicuous of the 10. Quiet, thin, with a bandage on her ankle where the shackles had left a mark. But the system revealed her true class, Shadow Tracker. And after 2 weeks of training, Nora moved through the forest like a shadow, literally. Ariel admitted that evening that she had lost sight of her twice in open terrain. Raynar began to think about Nora. Her mark hadn't wavered once. He looked at her through her true status. Potential 99, class sealed, reason for sealing. The system displayed a single word: voice. Nora had a seal on her voice, not physical muteness, magical. Someone had sealed her voice. She could whisper, she could nod, but she couldn't say a single word aloud louder than a whisper. Raynar remembered the rule. The seal is broken through an action that alleviates the pain. Nora had been forced to remain silent. That meant the seal would be broken when she spoke. But not just speak. When she says what she wants to say, of her own free will, what she had never said before. He didn't rush her. Instead, he started doing a simple thing. Every evening at dinner, he addressed each of them by name and asked the same thing: how the day went, what worked out, what didn't. When it was Nora's turn, he asked and waited. She answered in a whisper, a word or two, or she nodded. Raynar accepted any answer. He didn't pressure her, he didn't rush her. He just asked, every day, like a ritual. At the end of the 3rd week, what Raynar had both hoped for and feared happened. Aerial scouts spotted a detachment on the eastern road, 5 horsemen, armed, a blue banner with a silver ring, the coat of arms of Baron Victor Holland. They were heading toward Dorn Hollow. Ariel ran back, she reported. Raynar gathered everyone in the courtyard. Cassandra assessed the situation instantly. 5 horsemen. If they're professional soldiers, their levels range from 15 to 25. Against them, Sunny is at level 12, Ariel is at 15. Cassandra herself was at level 8. The rest were lower. The math wasn't in their favor. Raynar listened. Then he asked Yuna how long it would take for the detachment to arrive. Yuna calculated based on speed and distance. 4 hours. Raynar nodded. 4 hours. That's a long time. He didn't start preparing for battle. He started preparing to receive guests. Cassandra looked at him as if he were crazy. Raynar explained. 5 horsemen aren't an army, it's a test. Holland wants to understand what's going on at the fort. If they meet the guests with weapons, they'll give Holland a reason. If they meet them with a meal, Holland will get information, but won't have a reason to attack. Cassandra objected that Holland didn't need a pretext. Raynar replied that Holland was a nobleman, and nobles in Estrella don't attack openly without a formal justification. It's costly. It draws the capital's attention. Holland would act by the book. Which meant that as long as they behaved like the rightful lords of the land, Holland would smile and wait for the right moment. And every day while he waits, the girls grow stronger. Raynar positioned his men, Ariel on the tower, with a bow, not to shoot, for show. Let them see that the fort has an archer. Sunny is at the gate. It's open. Let them see the level. A 12th level character among the girls in the Greylands is unusual. It will make them think. Cassandra is next to Raynar. Leah is in the smithy. Let the hammering not stop. The sound of a working smithy is the sound of a living fort. The rest are in the courtyard, going about their usual business. No fuss, no panic. The detachment arrived in the evening. 5 horsemen. Raynar was right. Soldiers. Levels 16 to 22. The commander, level 22. Class, Knight. Young, self-assured, with a smirk on his face. He dismounted at the gate and introduced himself as Sir Davis. He said that Baron Holland sends his regards to the new lord of Dorn Hollow, and he is interested in the circumstances of life on the lands entrusted to him. Raynar met him at the gate, in clean clothes, with his back straight. Level 1 shone above his head like a verdict. Davis saw the 1, and his smirk widened. Raynar noticed this, and he used it to his advantage. He led Davis inside, showed him the fort, the cleared courtyard, the repaired roof, the smithy. Davis looked on. The smirk slowly faded. He saw Sonny at the gate, level 12. He saw Ariel on the tower, level 15. He heard the hammering from the smithy. He did the math and stopped smiling. Over dinner, Raynor led the conversation, calmly, politely. He asked about the Baron, about affairs in the barony, about the creatures from the forest. Davis answered briefly. He hadn't come to talk, he'd come to assess, and his assessment changed with every passing minute. When Raynor asked if the Baron needed help protecting the trade routes from the creatures, after all, Dorn Hollow could patrol the eastern route for a reasonable fee, Davis choked. He had expected to find a dying fort with a worthless lord. He found a functioning settlement with a lord who was offering contracts. Davis left the next morning with a letter for Baron Holland. In the letter, Raynor politely thanked him for the visit and proposed a trade agreement, an exchange of blacksmith's wares for grain and cloth. Raynor knew Holland would refuse, but the letter set a precedent, a paper trail, a peace proposal from Dorn Hollow. If Holland attacked after this, any court would see who had extended a hand first and who had struck first. Cassandra stood nearby as the detachment left. She was silent. Then she said, in an even voice, that in 20 years of service she had seen many commanders, generals, lords, dukes. None of them had won a battle with hot porridge and a trade letter. Raynor replied that he hadn't won a battle. He had bought time, and time is the only resource that cannot be forged in a smithy. That night, Raynor did not sleep. He sat on the roof of the tower and looked at the stars of Wayland, unfamiliar constellations, a foreign sky. But the air smelled of smoke from Leah's smithy, and fresh bread from Hannah's oven, and something else, something that had no scent but had a shape. 3 weeks ago it had been ruins and 10 broken people. Now it was a beginning, rough, fragile, but a beginning. And Raynor allowed himself a single second to think not as an engineer. He thought it looked like a home. A month. 30 days since the rattling wagon had spat out Raynor Falk and 10 shackled women at the gates of the dead fort. Raynor stood on the wall and looked down at what lay below. The courtyard was paved with stone, not all of it, a third, but that third was even and clean. The smithy smoked in a steady column. The vegetable garden behind the eastern wall had sprouted its first shoots. May had found root vegetable seeds in the forest that grew in the cursed soil. Not quickly, but they grew. New stonework stood by the well. The gates hung on wrought iron hinges made by Leah. They closed tightly. They held up to impact. Raynor knew because Cassandra had checked them personally, 3 times, from a running start. Sonny stood by the training post and practiced a combination of strikes. Level 19, in a month. A level 19 sword saint at 14. If anyone in the capital of Kronheim heard that number, they'd laugh at him. Then they'd check. Then they'd stop laughing. Sonny moved differently than she had on the first day. Back straight, step confident, a sword in her hand, a real one. Leah had forged it in the 3rd week. She named it First Nail, because it was just as crooked and rough as those first 6 nails. But Sonny held it as if it were an extension of her arm. Ariel returned from the forest, level 22, Archer of the Wind. She brought game every day, 2 rabbits, sometimes a deer. But today she didn't bring meat. She brought news. The creatures from the Whispering Forest were coming closer. Before, they wouldn't come within 3 leagues of the fort. Now the tracks were at 2, large tracks, not wolves, something bigger. Raynor listened. He looked at the project map. The system showed a red zone around the forest. The zone was expanding, slowly, but it was expanding. He called an evening council. It had become a tradition, every evening after dinner. Raynor, Cassandra, Una, May, sometimes Ariel if she wasn't out hunting. Raynor told them about the tracks. Cassandra nodded. She had expected this. She said that every autumn the Whispering Forest released a wave of creatures. Previous governors had dealt with the problem the same way. They locked themselves in the fort and prayed. Then they were found dead. Raynar asked Yuna what the treatises said. Yuna answered without hesitation. The twisted react to concentrations of magical energy. The more powerful people in one place, the more active the creatures in the surrounding area. 10 bearers with a potential of 99 act as a beacon. They literally draw the forest in. Raynar fell silent. Then he said that walls weren't enough. They needed a defensive perimeter outside the fort, a moat, traps, observation posts, and they needed to do it in 2 weeks, before the first autumn cold snap. Cassandra raised an eyebrow. She asked what kind of forces. Raynar replied that he'd done the math. 10 people, the learning curve, skill transfer. If they distributed the work and training properly in parallel, they could get it done in 2 weeks. Cassandra said it was madness. Raynar replied that madness had a Gantt chart. Yuna asked what a Gantt chart was. Raynar picked up a stick and drew on the dirt floor. Horizontal lines. Each line is a task. The length of the line is time. The intersections are dependencies. You can't set traps until the trench is dug. You can't dig the trench until the perimeter is marked. Yuna stared at the drawing with wide eyes. Then she took out a small board and began to copy it. 10 minutes later, she had redrawn the diagram more neatly than Raynar, and she added 3 tasks he had missed. Raynar looked at her version. It was better. He told her so. Yuna smiled slightly. The 2 weeks of work that followed were the hardest since their arrival. Everyone dug the trench. Raynar dug alongside the rest. His level 1 body could handle 2 hours, then his hands would shake and his back would burn. He'd take a break, drink some water, and pick up the shovel again. No one commented, but everyone saw. On the 3rd day of digging the trench, people from Old Fort arrived at the fort. 5 of them, strong men with shovels. Graham led the way. The scout who had eaten porridge a month ago. He said the village elder had sent them to help with the ditch, in exchange for repairing the plows. Raynar shook his hand. It was the first physical contact between Dorn Hollow and the outside world. 5 pairs of working hands. The ditch that would have taken 2 weeks was finished in 10 days. Leah was forging spearheads, 20 a day. Her skill level grew with every blow of the hammer. 14, 18, 22. She worked from dawn till dusk. Raynar noticed that she had stopped slouching. For 3 years she had hunched over, hiding her height, hiding her shoulders. Now she stood straight, at her full height. And when the men from Old Ford saw a woman a head taller than them, holding a hammer heavier than their axes with one hand, they fell silent. And then one of them asked if he could watch her forge. Leah nodded. And Raynar saw something new flicker across her face. Pride. On the 7th day of work, Raynar turned his attention to May, the infirmary. Until then, May had been treating people in the main hall, on the floor, with a bag of herbs and rags instead of bandages. Raynar showed her the blueprint, a separate room in the east wing, 3 beds, shelves for herbs, a table for mixing decoctions, and a window facing south. Because he'd noticed that May always sat closer to the light. May took the blueprint. She studied it for a long time. Then she looked up. Her eyes were filled with tears. She said in an even voice that the window wasn't necessary, that she was used to working in the dark. Raynar replied that habit and necessity were 2 different things, and that there would be light in his infirmary, because a doctor needs to see the color of a patient's skin under natural light. It's basic diagnostics. May blinked. Then she said quietly that he was the first person to explain the window to her through medicine rather than through kindness. Raynar began building the infirmary that very day, with his own hands, stone, mortar, masonry, slowly, crookedly. But Leah helped with the framework. Nora hauled stones silently, like a shadow. Hannah mixed the mortar. By the 10th day, the walls were standing. By the 12th, there was a roof. On the 13th day, May stepped inside. 3 beds, shelves, a table, a south-facing window. Light fell on her hands. May stood in the middle of the room and breathed. She just breathed. Raynar saw the seal above her head crack deeply, all the way to the bottom. May turned to him. She said that 3 years ago her younger brother had died in her arms. A fever. She knew how to treat it, but she had nothing. No herbs, no tools, no clean water. She held him and watched him fade away. And after that, her hands became foreign to her. She could heal, but every time she touched a patient, she saw her brother's face. Raynar listened. He didn't interrupt. When she fell silent, he said one sentence. He said she wasn't to blame for what she didn't have. And now she has it. Let her use it. The system updated silently. Seal removed. Class, Healer of Life. Level available for growth from 1 to 99. May didn't see it, but she felt it. Something inside her clicked, like a lock opened by a key that fit on the first try. She looked at her hands, then at Raynar, and said in a voice without irony, without sarcasm, without a defensive wall. She said, "Thank you, Lord." Raynar nodded and left, because the infirmary was now her territory, and he had no intention of lingering there. The 14th day. The defensive perimeter was complete. A moat as deep as a man's height encircled the fort, stakes at the bottom, 3 observation posts on the surrounding hills, a system of traps along the forest edge, primitive, ropes and bells, but enough to warn of the creature's approach. Raynar stood on the wall and looked at the finished work. The project map showed a green zone around the fort, small, but green. The men from Old Ford were heading home with their repaired plows and 2 sacks of forged nails. Graham lingered at the gate. He looked at Raynar and said that the village head wanted to speak with him personally, that he would come himself in a week. Raynar nodded, shook his hand, and when Graham left, he allowed himself to breathe a sigh of relief. Contact established, the first ally on the horizon. Small, weak, but the first. The first attack by the creatures from the Whispering Forest came at night, without warning. The bells on the traps rang 3 hours before dawn. Raynar woke up instantly. Cassandra was already standing nearby. She hadn't been sleeping, she had been waiting. She said one word, "They're coming." Raynar climbed onto the wall. The project map flashed before his eyes. Red dots were moving from the forest toward the fort. Lots of them. He counted. 12, 15, 23. 23 distorted ones. Wolves. Levels 12 to 20. And among them, one dot was larger. Level 28. The class was shown as question marks, something the system couldn't identify. The Pax Alpha. Raynar acted as the dispatcher. His voice was steady, his commands were short. Aerial to the tower, bow, targets from far to near. Start with the stragglers on the flanks, don't touch the Alpha. Sunny to the gate, sword, hold the passage, don't go beyond the moat. Cassandra, right flank of the wall, Leah, left. Leah had no weapon other than a hammer. Raynar said the hammer would do. May in the infirmary, prepare everything we have. Yuna, next to Raynar. Record everything, every skill of every creature, every attack, every weakness. Data is more important right now than another sword. The other 4. Irene, Nora, Hannah, Vivian. Inside the building, their levels are too low, but each has a task. Irene is to bring arrows to Ariel. Hannah is to boil water for May. Vivian is to prepare bandages. Nora. Raynar hesitated. Then he said, "Nora, to the south wall. Watch. If anything comes around from the south, let us know." Nora nodded and vanished into the darkness. Literally. Her shadow tracker skill worked even with her class sealed. She became invisible in the night. The first wave struck 10 minutes later. The wolves leaped over the moat. The stakes slowed 3 of them down. The rest scrambled up the wall. Fast. Fierce. White eyes glowed in the darkness. Ariel fired from above. 3 arrows, 3 hits. 2 wolves fell. The third twitched but kept climbing. Ariel cursed and fired again. The wolf collapsed. At the gate, Sunny met 4 of them. She stood in the stance Cassandra had drilled into her every day for the past 5 weeks, sword in both hands. The first wolf leaped. Sunny stepped to the left and slashed. Clean. No wasted motion. The wolf fell with its side sliced open. The second. The third. She moved like water, smoothly and relentlessly. Raynar watched from above and saw on the project map that her fatigue level was rising. Fast. She's a 14-year-old girl. Her body won't hold out for long. He shouted to Cassandra, "Switch with Sunny in 3 minutes." Cassandra moved from the right flank to the gate. Her level had risen to 15 over the past few weeks. Dark night. The class was still sealed, but her basic combat skills were working at full capacity. She stood next to Sunny, and they worked as a pair, as if they'd been training together for years, not 5 weeks. Raynar shifted his attention to the Alpha. The creature stood behind the moat. It didn't attack. It watched. Level 28. It was the size of a horse, black fur with crimson streaks, 6 eyes, white, without pupils. It wasn't looking at the fighters. It was looking at Raynar. On the wall. The system flickered. Raynar felt something touch his consciousness. Cold, alien, as if the creature were trying to read him. And in that moment, he understood what Yuna had been saying. They are a beacon. His mentor's skill. The seals removed. Every time he unlocks someone's class, he leaves an imprint. And this imprint isn't seen only by humans. It's also seen by those who live deep in the forest. Alpha turned around, slowly, and went back into the forest. The other wolves followed her, those who could. 9 bodies remained lying in the ditch and by the walls. The fight lasted 20 minutes. It felt like an eternity. Raynar went down to the courtyard. He checked each one personally. Sunny was sitting by the wall, breathing heavily. Her hands were shaking, but there was something new on her face. Not fear, not pride. Confidence. The quiet, calm confidence of a person who knows they can protect their home. Ariel up in the tower was counting the remaining arrows. 7. She had used 12 in 20 minutes. That's a lot. For some reason, Leah was clenching her jaw. Raynar approached. He saw a laceration on her forearm. A wolf had grazed her with a claw. Leah said it was just a scratch. Raynar sent her to May. No discussion. Leah opened her mouth to protest. Raynar simply looked at her. She closed her mouth and went to the wound. May treated the wound. Her hands didn't tremble. For the first time in 3 years, her hands were doing what they were made to do, and they were doing it well. Raynar saw on the project map how the indicator of her inner conflict had dropped. Not to 0, but it had dropped. In the morning, Raynar gathered everyone, debriefing, another thing from a past life that no one here knew. He called it a debrief. What worked, what didn't work, what could be improved. Cassandra reported on the battle, Ariel on arrow expenditure, Yuna read out notes on the creature's behavior. Raynar listened and asked questions. He didn't criticize, he asked questions. Why the Alpha hadn't attacked. Yuna suggested that the Alpha was gauging their strength, that next time she'd come with a larger pack, or not come at all and send something else instead. Raynar nodded. He agreed. Then he turned to Nora. He asked what she had seen from the south wall. Nora looked at him. She opened her mouth, and for the first time since they'd been at the fort, she spoke without whispering. Her voice was quiet, hoarse, like a mechanism that hadn't been oiled in a long time, but audible. She said 3 were approaching from the south, separate from the pack. She threw a rock and they retreated. Raynar looked at her. Everyone looked at her. Nora fell silent. Then she realized what she had done. Her eyes widened. She covered her mouth with her hand. Raynar spoke calmly. He said it was important information, that thanks to her, they knew the creatures had a flanking tactic, and that Nora had prevented an attack from the rear. He didn't mention the voice. He deliberately ignored it. He didn't make a big deal out of it. He just accepted it as a normal part of the report, as if Nora had always spoken aloud, as if nothing unusual had happened. But the seal above her head burst, quietly, without a crack, like ice melting in the sun. The system updated. Seal removed. Shadow tracker class. Level available for growth from 1 to 99. Nora didn't cry. She just took her hand away from her mouth. And when Raynar asked if there was anything else she'd noticed that night, Nora answered, out loud, in a complete sentence. She said that the Alpha's tracks didn't lead back into the forest. They led east, toward the quarry. Raynar looked at Yuna. Yuna took notes. Then she looked up, and their eyes met. They were both thinking the same thing. The quarry. Abandoned. Deep. The perfect lair for something big. If the Alpha had settled there, the problem wouldn't go away on its own. Raynar sighed, one task at a time. But the tasks didn't end. 3 days after the attack in Dorn Hollow, the village elder of Old Ford arrived, in person. An old man named Hagen, over 60 years old, level 9, farmer class. He came with his daughter, a girl of about 16, and with a sack of grain. A gift, not a trade, a gift. Raynar met him at the gate, showed him around the fort. Hagen looked on in silence. He saw the moat, he saw the smithy, he saw the infirmary, he saw the training ground. Then he sat down at the table and spoke plainly. He said that Old Ford wanted Dorn Hollow's protection, that every winter they lost people, that Baron Holland took taxes but offered no defense, that if Lord Falk was willing to defend Old Ford, then Old Ford is ready to supply Dorn Hollow. Raynar didn't answer right away. He looked at Yuna. Yuna turned over the board with the calculations. 60 people in Old Ford. The harvest covers 70% of their needs. Surpluses are minimal. If Dorn Hollow accepts protection, they'll have to patrol the road between the village and the fort. That means at least 2 people on duty every other day. Ariel and Nora. They have the right classes. Raynar nodded. He turned to Hagen. He said he accepts, but not as vassal and lord, as neighbors. Old Broad supplies Dorn Hollow with grain and vegetables. Dorn Hollow patrols the road, repairs tools, and treats the sick in May's infirmary. A fair exchange. Put in writing. Yuna has already written it up. Hagen drew a cross instead of signing. Raynar signed his name. The first Dorn Hollow Treaty. Crooked letters on a wax tablet. But it was a document. And Raynar knew that a document is a foundation. Cities are built on documents. The second month turned into the third. The cold came sooner than Raynar had expected. Morning frost covered the stones of the courtyard. Breath came out in steam. Winter in the gray border was no joke. Raynar stood by the project map and counted supplies. Grain from Old Ford, salted game from Ariel, root vegetables from the garden, flour, salt, honey, dried herbs from May. He added up the numbers, and he didn't like the result. At the current rate of consumption, the supplies would last 2 months. Winter lasts 4. A 2-month gap. It would mean certain death if no solution was found. He called a council meeting. He laid out the numbers. No sugarcoating. Cassandra listened and suggested cutting rations. Raynar refused. He said that cutting rations meant reducing the effectiveness of training. That meant slowing the growth of their levels. That meant weakening their defenses during the most dangerous time of year. It couldn't be done. Ariel suggested hunting deeper in the forest. Raynar refused. The forest is more dangerous in winter. The beasts are hungry and aggressive. He wouldn't risk Ariel's life. Yuna raised her hand. She quietly said there was a third option. She had read about the lake rift in the treatises, a place 2 days' journey to the north, a former fishing village, abandoned after the Twisted slaughtered the inhabitants 5 years ago. But the lake remained, and so did the fish in it. In winter, the lake doesn't freeze completely because it's fed by hot springs. If we organize an expedition and set up a catch, we can cover the shortage for the whole winter. Raynar looked at Yuna, then at the map. A 2-day journey along a winter road through the territory where an entire village had been slaughtered 5 years ago. He asked Yuna what she knew about the reasons for the attack. Yuna replied that the treatises mentioned an anomaly, a fissure in the ground from which distorted energy seeped. The creatures were drawn to the fissure, not the village. The villagers were collateral damage. Raynar asked if the fissure was active now. Yuna didn't know. No one had checked in 5 years. The decision was risky, but the alternative was starvation. Raynar chose the expedition. The team, himself, Ariel, Cassandra, Nora. 4 of them. Enough to handle reconnaissance, not enough to leave the fort unguarded. Sunny would stay in charge. Level 24 by now. She could hold the walls if anything came out of the forest. May is in the infirmary. Leah is at the forge. Yuna is handling coordination. Raynar saw Sunny press her lips together when she heard he was leaving. She wanted to go with him. He knew it from the project map. The alarm indicator jumped to red, but she didn't say a word. She nodded. She took command, as if she'd been doing it her whole life. The expedition set out at dawn, 4 of them. Raynar in the center, level 1, the weakest link. Cassandra in front, sword drawn. Ariel on the flank, bow at the ready. Nora. Nora was everywhere and nowhere. She glided between the trees like smoke. Her level had risen to 16, shadow tracker. In the winter forest, she was nearly invisible. The first day passed without incident. The road wound through the hills. A thin layer of snow lay on the ground. They found animal tracks, but they were old. They spent the night in a ravine. The campfire was small. They took turns on watch. Raynar stood watch alongside the others. Cassandra objected. She said he needed to sleep because he was the only one who wouldn't recover from a single sleepless night. Raynar replied that there were no first or second-class people in his team. Everyone stands watch. Everyone eats the same. Everyone freezes the same. Cassandra fell silent. But when it was her turn to stand watch, she threw her cloak over the sleeping Raynar. He didn't wake up. But in the morning he knew, because the cloak smelled of metal and clean sweat, Cassandra's scent. He didn't say anything, he just silently returned the cloak. On the second day, they reached the lake fault. The village was dead, the houses had collapsed, the boats had rotted on the shore. But the lake was alive. The dark waters steamed from hot springs. Raynar saw fish near the surface, lots of them. Yuna was right. This is the solution. But first, the rift. Nora found it beyond the village, a crack in the rock 2 paces wide. A violet-tinged mist seeped from it. Raynar stepped closer. The system reacted. Attention, source of distorted energy, threat level medium, recommended to leave the area. Raynar didn't leave. He stood and watched. The engineer inside him analyzed. A crack, energy, mist. It's a leak, like a leak in a pipeline. If you plug the leak, the area will be safe. But what can be used to plug a magical crack? He turned to Cassandra. He asked if she knew about sealing rifts. Cassandra shook her head. That's a mage's job, not a knight's. Raynar looked at his project map. He unfolded it over the rift and saw something he hadn't expected. The system displayed the rift as a task, with indicators, damage level, leak type, and a note. Suitable for repair, requires skill, territory seal. Available to the mentor class from level 1. Raynar blinked. He reread it. Territory seal. His skill. Available from level 1. He didn't know he had such a skill. The system hadn't shown it before. Maybe because there hadn't been a suitable task before. Maybe because the system revealed skills as needed, like instructions that show the next step only after you've completed the previous one. He activated the skill. He stood at the edge of the crack. He placed his hands on the stone. The system requested confirmation. Territory seal. Cost. The bearer's life force. Raynar read it and went cold. Not mana, not magic. Life force. The skill was taking his own years of life. Not much, a few months, maybe a year. For level 1, that's significant. He already had so little. But if he didn't seal the crack, the village couldn't be used. Without the village, there would be no fish. No fish, no winter. Raynar didn't think twice. He confirmed it. He felt something leave his body. Warmth, as if a glass of hot water had been poured out of a vessel. His legs went weak. His head spun. Cassandra grabbed him by the shoulder. The crack beneath his hands closed. The stone fused back together. The purple mist dissipated. Silence. Cassandra held him tightly. She asked what he had done. Raynar replied that he had fixed the pipe. Cassandra didn't understand, but she didn't let go until he was standing firmly. Ariel looked at the sealed crack with an expression he had never seen on her face before, something between respect and anger. She said he was an idiot, that a level 1 shouldn't risk his life. Raynar replied that if he didn't, all 10 of them would go hungry for 2 months. Ariel turned away, but her hand tightened on her bow so that her knuckles turned white. They spent 2 days in the lake rift. They want their catch. Raynar showed them how to make a simple net out of ropes and willow twigs. The skill transfer worked. Ariel mastered it in an hour. They filled 4 sacks with fish. They salted them. They smoked some of it right there. On the way back, Raynar walked more slowly. His body felt the loss. Not pain, emptiness, as if he had become a little lighter, slightly thinner. Cassandra walked beside him, matching his pace. She didn't mention it, she just walked beside him. When they returned to Dorn Hollow, Sunny was standing at the gate, waiting. She saw Raynar, and something in her face flinched. She could see he had changed. Something was gone. She didn't ask. She just took one of the bags of fish and carried it inside. But that evening she sat down next to him by the fireplace and didn't leave until he fell asleep. Winter settled over the gray border like a heavy white blanket. Snow covered the hills. The wind howled through the cracks in the walls. The temperature dropped every week. Every morning, Raynar woke up and the first thing he did was look at the project map. Health indicators, supplies, indoor temperatures. Little things that determined whether they lived or died. The fort was holding up. The roof was holding the snow. The fireplace was constantly burning. Leah had devised a system of clay pipe ducts that distributed heat to 2 rooms instead of 1. Raynar hadn't shown her this idea. She came up with it herself. He saw the drawing and nodded silently. That was the moment he realized that the blacksmith of souls wasn't just a man who struck metal with a hammer. He was an engineer, of another world, of another tradition, but an engineer. Training continued every day, even in a blizzard. Cassandra put them through their paces in the courtyard, snow up to their ankles, wind in their faces. But their learning curve didn't stop. Sunny reached level 30 by midwinter, Ariel 28. Cassandra. Her seal still hadn't been lifted, but her basic skills were growing, level 19. She compensated for her sealed class with pure technique and 20 years of combat experience. Raynar could see from the project map that she was the most effective of all in training. Not the fastest to level up, the most effective. Every movement was polished, nothing superfluous. She trained others but grew herself as well. One evening after training, Raynar stayed in the hall to go over Yuna's reports. Firewood consumption, food supplies, duty roster. He heard footsteps. Cassandra entered and sat down across from him, silently. Raynar looked up. She stared at him for a long time. Then she spoke. For the first time in 3 months, she spoke of herself not as the captain of the guard, but as a person. She told him about Duke Walter, her former suzerain. She had served him for 20 years. She started at 15, as a squire. She worked her way up to captain of the personal guard. For 20 years, she stood between him and danger. For 20 years, he addressed her by her surname. Veil this, Veil that. Never by her first name. She didn't complain. It was normal. That's how the world works, lord and servant. Then the Duke decided that an alliance with the Order of the Silver Chain would be more advantageous for him. The Order demanded the surrender of all practitioners of the dark classes. Cassandra was a dark knight. The Duke signed the warrant for her arrest without batting an eye. 20 years of service, one stroke of the pen. She was chained up by the very people she had trained, sold at the market in Kronheim, like livestock. Raynar listened. He didn't interrupt. When she fell silent, he didn't say it was unfair. He didn't say she deserved better. Instead, he said one thing. He said that 2 weeks ago, he'd messed up the guard schedule. He'd put Hannah on the night wall on the coldest night. Hannah nearly froze her hands off. May got there in time, but it shouldn't have come to that. It was his mistake. He hadn't checked the weather conditions before drawing up the schedule. And he apologizes for it. To Hannah. And to Cassandra. Because Cassandra is responsible for people's safety, and his mistake put her job at risk. Cassandra was silent. She looked at him. Raynar didn't look away. He wasn't playing games. He truly felt guilty about that guard duty. And he knew that none of Cassandra's previous masters had ever in their lives uttered the word "I'm sorry" to a subordinate, much less to a former slave. The seal above Cassandra's head, that very seal that held tighter than all the others, which neither battles, nor training, nor shared work. That seal cracked, not from a blow, from the silence, from a simple word spoken in an empty hall by the light of the fireplace. "I'm sorry." System updated, seal removed. Class, Dark Knight. Level available for growth from 1 to 99. Cassandra felt it. Raynar saw a shiver run through her body. Dark energy, a class considered heretical in the kingdom. She felt it in full force. And for the first time, she wasn't terrified, because no one in this room was going to forge chains. She stood up, straightened herself. She had been tall before, but now she had grown taller, not physically, in a different way. She looked down at Raynar and said 2 words. "Lord Falk." But there was no condescension in those words. There was no irony. There was no submission. There was something that Raynar didn't immediately recognize. An oath. Winter continued. The creatures attacked twice more. Small groups, 5 or 7 at a time. Lower levels than the first time. The Alpha didn't show up. Raynar suspected that the sealed rift had cut off her power source. Without the source of distorted energy, the pack was weakening. Each attack was easier to fend off than the last. Sunny and Cassandra worked in tandem at the gates. Ariel took out the creatures from the tower. Nora patrolled the perimeter, invisible. In the middle of winter, Raynar set his sights on Irene's seals, Hannah and Vivian, the 3 remaining ones. Irene Duarte, true class, blade dancer. Her pain was tied to her body, scars, many, on her arms and back. Her former master would whip her for any offense. Irene couldn't undress in front of others. She wore a robe even in the bathhouse that Leah built at the end of the 2nd month. Raynar didn't pry into her affairs, but he asked Vivian to sew training clothes that would cover the scars but not restrict movement. Lightweight, comfortable, made of soft fabric. Vivian sewed for 3 days. When Irene put on these clothes and stepped onto the training ground and moved, for the first time without stiffness, for the first time without fear that her robe would ride up and everyone would see. The seal broke. The system confirmed it. Dancer of the Blades, 1 to 99. Hannah Ray, true class, Priestess of Dawn. Her pain, her hunger, not metaphorical, physical. Hannah had been starved for 2 years. For every offense, they took away her food. She learned not to ask. She learned not to eat in front of others. She hid pieces of bread in her clothes. Raynar noticed this in the first week. He didn't say anything. He didn't take it away. Instead, every evening he left an extra portion in the kitchen, with a note, for Hannah, by name, not secretly, out in the open. A month later, Hannah stopped hiding food. 2 months later, she sat down at the communal table. 3 months later, she asked for a second helping, out loud, in front of everyone. The seal was broken. Priestess of Dawn, level 1 to 99. Vivian Lowe, true class, Weaver of Illusions. The quietest of the 10, quieter than Nora, quieter than Sunny. Vivian was invisible not because she was hiding, but because she had been taught to be invisible. A good servant is one who goes unnoticed. Raynar couldn't find the key to her seal for a long time, until one day he saw her looking at the cloaks she had sewn for the others, dark gray with white trim, identical, beautiful. She looked at them with longing, not because she wanted a cloak, because she wanted people to notice who had sewn them. Raynar went up to her that evening, in front of everyone, at dinner. He stood up and said he wanted to acknowledge one thing, that the cloaks they were all wearing had been sewn by Vivian Lowe, that without those cloaks they would be freezing on the walls, that Vivian had sewn them from scraps of rabbit fur and sheer stubbornness, and that if anyone else hadn't thanked her personally, now was a good time. Silence. Then Sunny turned to Vivian and said thank you, then May, then Leah, one after another, 10 voices, 10 names. Vivian sat and didn't move, and then she covered her face with her hands. The seal crumbled. Weaver of Illusions, 1 to 99, all 10. Raynar sat at the table and looked at the 10 women, all seals removed, all classes unlocked. 3 months, 90 days, and 10 sealed legends became 10 growing warriors. He felt the system tremble. New notification, achievement, mentor, all protégés unlocked, reward, general connection skill, description. The mentor senses the condition of each protégé without a project map. Distance is unlimited. Raynar closed the notification. A new tool, useful. But he was thinking of something else. 10 seals. 10 seals on him. Yuna had said that each removal made him more noticeable. 10 removals. He now glowed on the world map like a lighthouse. And those who had gathered these 10, those who wanted them to die quietly in the gray boundary, they already know. Cassandra had her seal removed after Raynar publicly apologized for his mistake. Over the winter, Raynar removed the seals from the remaining 3. Irene threw clothing covering her scars. Hana through the right to eat openly. Vivian through public recognition of her work. All 10 girls are fully revealed, and this achievement unlocked Raynar a new skill, general connection. Spring came to the gray frontier as a guest who was not expected, but who was welcomed. The snow was melting, streams ran down the hills, the earth was thawing. Raynar stood on the wall and breathed in the damp spring air. 3 months of winter, not a single casualty. Everyone is alive, everyone healthy, everyone has grown. He unfolded the project map and looked at the numbers. Sunny Park, level 38, Holy Sword. Mei Chong, level 30, Healer of Life. Ariel Winter, level 35, Archer of the Wind. Leah Hale, level 33, Soulsmith. Yuna So, level 22, System Archivist. Cassandra Vale, level 28, Dark Knight. Irene Duarte, level 25, Blade Dancer. Nora Grimm, level 27, Shadow Tracker. Hannah Ray, level 24, Priestess of Dawn. Vivian Lowe, level 20, Weaver of Illusions. 10 women, average level 28. In the Kingdom of Estrain, the average level for a professional soldier was 20. The average level for a knight was 30. The average level for the elite guard was 40. In 6 months, Raynar's girls would be the elite. In a year, legends. But spring brought more than just warmth. It brought people. First 1, then 3, then a dozen. Refugees from neighboring villages, from the barony of Holland, from distant farms. They were heading to Dorn Hollow because rumors had spread. Graham had told them. People from Old Ford had told the merchants. The merchants had spread the word along the trade routes. The story grew with details. Somewhere in the gray border stands a fort. There is a lord who doesn't care about your rank. They feed you there. They heal you there. They don't beat you there. The first to arrive was a girl from Morin County, 18 years old, level 7, class maid. Bruises on her body, emptiness in her eyes. She made it to the gates and collapsed. May picked her up, carried her to the infirmary. Raynar stood in the doorway and watched. He activated True Status. Potential 34, not 99. An ordinary person, not one of the 10, not special. Just a girl who was in pain and who came to the place where they say they don't beat people. Raynar accepted her, without hesitation. He gave her a room, he gave her food. He called her name at the morning roll call. She wasn't the 11th in his special 10. She was the first citizen of Dorn Hollow. When Yuna entered her in the registry, Raynar realized that the fort was over. The city had begun. Over the next 2 weeks, 17 more people arrived. Families, lonesomes, an old blacksmith from Old Ford with his wife. He asked to work with Leah. She accepted him without a word. He became her apprentice, a man of 70, an apprentice to a 20-year-old woman. Anywhere else, that would have been humiliating. In Dorn Hollow, it was normal. Because Leah was a better blacksmith, and everyone knew it. Raynar worked 20 hours a day, planning, allocation, logistics, where to house the new people, what to feed them, how to integrate them into the existing order. Yuna became his right-hand woman in administrative matters. She devised a record-keeping system. Every resident, skills, level, needs, work assignments. Raynar looked at her tables and saw familiar structures in them. It was Excel, on wax tablets, but Excel. One evening, the two of them sat together poring over maps of the new residential district. Yuna was sketching, Raynar was calculating. The candles were burning down. Yuna looked up and said she didn't understand one thing. She said that in all the time she'd been observing Raynar, she hadn't found a logical explanation for his skill. The mentor isn't described in any of the 112 treatises she'd transcribed. The class exists, but it's never worked like this. He had never removed the seals. He had never accelerated training on such a scale. She asked directly, "Who are you, really?" Raynar was silent. He looked at the candle, then he answered. He said he was a man who had devoted his entire life to a single task. He took what was broken and made it work. That he didn't know why his class functioned this way and not another, but he knew that each of his skills came at a price. Sealing the territory had taken a part of his life. Every time a seal was removed, it left a mark by which he would be found. The common bond meant that he felt the pain of each of the 10, physically. When Sunny cut herself during training yesterday, his right hand twitched. Yuna listened. She took notes. Then she looked up and said that if his skills work through sacrifice, then the more he does, the less of him remains. Raynar nodded. Yuna said this needed to be investigated, that she wanted to systematize all his abilities and find patterns, that if there was a limit, they had to know where it was. Raynar agreed, and for the first time, he looked at Yuna not as an archivist, but as a partner. Yuna noticed that look. She blushed. She buried her face in the tablet. Raynar returned to the maps, but something between them had shifted. By a millimeter, but it had shifted. The 6th month. Raynar sat in the hall and wrote, 3 pages, The Codex of Hope Landing. He had thought long and hard about the title. Dorn Hollow meant Thorn Wasteland, a place of exile. He needed a different name. Hope Landing, Land of Hope. Grandiose, he knew, but sometimes grandiosity isn't just for show. Sometimes it's the foundation. The codex was short, 3 pages, handwritten. Do not hit anyone. Do not buy anyone. Do not turn anyone away without food. Every resident has the right to a name and to be addressed by name. Every resident has the right to food, shelter, and medical care. Every resident works according to their abilities, not their class. Status does not determine a person's worth. The land belongs to those who work it. Disputes are resolved by the council, not by force. The council consists of all residents over the age of 16. Every vote is equal. Raynar read the code aloud at the General Assembly. 28 people, 10 girls, 18 new residents. Elder Hagen from Old Ford had come to listen. Raynar read and watched the faces. Sunny stared at him without looking away. Cassandra stood against the wall with her back straight, listening to every word. May wiped her hands on her apron and nodded. Ariel sat on the windowsill, and for the first time in 6 months, her expression wasn't prickly, it was pensive. Leah stood by the door with a hammer on her shoulder like a guard. Yunu was writing the text on a clean slate. Nora stood by the wall, and for the first time ever, was smiling. Quietly, barely noticeably, but she was smiling. When Raynar finished, the silence lasted 3 seconds. Then Hagen stood up. Old Ford requests to join Hopeland, officially. Raynar looked at him, then at Yuna. Yuna was already writing. The agreement for the village of Old Ford to come under the jurisdiction of Hopeland. Raynar signed. Hagen put a cross. 60 residents of Old Broad plus 28 residents of Dorn Hollow, 88 people. This is no longer a fort or a village. It's a settlement. Raynar took advantage of a loophole in imperial law that Yuna found. Any settlement with a population of over 50 people, permanent infrastructure, and a documented charter can submit a petition for free city status. The petition doesn't require the local baron's approval, only the crown's, and the crown is far away, and the mail is slow. By the time the petition reaches Kronheim, Hopeland will be a city not on paper, but on the ground. Raynar sent a pigeon with the petition. Then he stood on the wall and watched as the bird disappeared into the spring sky. Behind him stood the city, small, fragile, but a city, with a smithy and an infirmary and the school Yuna had begun to build, with people who had come here because they had nowhere else to go. Raynar Falk, Level 1, Lord of a city that was never supposed to exist. He placed his hands on the cold stone of the wall and felt, through the common bond, 10 points of warmth inside, 10 hearts beating steadily. And he thought that this was the strangest project in both of his lives, and the most important. Summer in the gray frontier smelled of heated stone and fresh earth. Hoplanding was growing. Raynar looked down at the city from the roof of the eastern tower and counted. 4 new houses, a mill by the stream, a bridge across the ravine, a second bridge on the road to Old Ford, a school, a single-story stone building that Yuna had designed over 3 weeks. Inside stood benches and tables that Leah had whacked together in 2 days. A slate board hung on the wall, the first in the history of the Gray Frontier. The population had surpassed 120. People were coming. From the villages, from the barony of Holland, from distant farms. One caravan had come all the way from Kronheim, a merchant named Doran, Level 14, merchant class. He came to check out the rumors and stayed, not because he was inspired by Raynar's ideas, because he saw Leah's forge. By this point, she was forging weapons of a quality he had never seen anywhere outside the capital, a Level 40 soul blacksmith. Leah's weapons were alive. Each blade was tuned to its owner. Sunny's sword responded to her movements before she even began her strike. Ariel's bow guided the arrow toward its target as if magnetized. Doran looked at this and began calculating his profits. Raynar allowed it. Trade meant connections. Connections meant information. Information meant survival. By this point, Yuna had built a management system that Raynar might have called a primitive ERP. Every resource accounted for, every resident in the registry. Flows of grain, meat, metal, and timber scheduled by the week. Duty rosters, construction plans, budget. Yuna worked with data as naturally as she breathed. Her level rose not from combat, but from pure intellectual labor. The system archivist gained experience for every skill he observed and cataloged, and in Hopeland, the number of skills grew every day. Once, Raynar asked her why she so meticulously recorded every incantation, every move, every technique. Yuna replied that knowledge was the only thing that could not be taken away with chains. That when she was sold into slavery, she lost everything: her home, her family, her name. but 112 treatises remained in her head, and no one could take them away. Raynar was silent. Then he said he wanted her to write her own book, not to rewrite someone else's, her own, about the Hope Landing experience, about the learning curve, about the removal of the seals, about how the system really works. Yuna looked at him as if he had offered her a throne. Then she said quietly that no one had ever asked her to write her own thoughts, only those of others. Raynar replied that here her thoughts were valued more highly. Yuna's seal had been removed long ago, but that evening something in her changed for good. She took out a blank tablet and wrote the first line. Treatise on the Nature of Hidden Potential. Author, Yuna So. Archivist of the System. Hopeland. The 8th month brought the problem Raynar had been expecting. The capital had finally taken notice. A dove brought a letter bearing the royal seal. The petition for free city status has been denied. The lands of the Grey Frontier are the property of the Crown and are not subject to self-governance. Lord Falk is ordered to appear in Kronheim for clarification. Signed, Chancellor Estrena. Raynar read the letter twice. Then he showed it to Cassandra. She read it. Her expression didn't change. She said this was just the beginning, that the rejection of the petition was a formality. The real threat would follow, in the form of men with swords. Raynar nodded. He knew. But he had something the previous governors of Dorn Hollow didn't have. He had 10 women with an average level of 42, and a city where 120 people were ready to defend him. He didn't go to Kronheim. Instead, he wrote a reply, a polite, long, with quotes from imperial law that Yuna had found in treatises. The gist was simple. The Free Cities Act is in effect. The petition was filed in accordance with established procedure. Rejection requires a personal decision by the king, not the chancellor. Until a royal decision is received, Hope Landing continues to operate within the law. Raynar knew this wouldn't stop the capital, but it would slow them down. Bureaucracy moves slowly, and every day of delay meant another level for Sunny, another blade for Leah, another page for Yuna. A week after the letter, other guests arrived, not from the capital, from the east. 3 of them, in white cloaks, on horseback. A silver banner bearing the image of a broken chain. The Order of the Silver Chain. Raynar stood on the wall and watched them ride up. Cassandra was beside him, her hand on her sword, her face stony. She knew that symbol. That symbol had sold her into slavery. The riders stopped at the gate, 2 soldiers and one, tall, thin, straight as a sword, silver hair, a calm face, clean, without a single scar. Level 75, class Purifier. Raynar read it and memorized it. The system displayed the name, Sir Augustin Kale. Kale dismounted, removed his gloves, folded them neatly, looked at the gate, at the walls, at the figures on the walls, counted the levels. Raynar saw how his eyes moved, counting, every one. Then he raised his head and looked at Raynar. On the wall, level 1. Kale smiled, not maliciously, not condescendingly, with genuine curiosity, like a scientist who had discovered a new species of beetle. Raynar descended and opened the gate, personally. Cassandra followed him. Every muscle in her body was taut as a bowstring. Raynar sensed it through the common bond. Rage, fear, hatred. 20 years of service, one stroke of the pen. The order stood before her. Raynar invited Kale to enter. Kale accepted. He entered, unarmed. His soldiers remained at the gate. Raynar led him through the city, the same route he had once shown Davis. But the city had changed. Davis had seen the fort. Kale saw the city, houses, the mill, the smithy, the school, the infirmary, children playing in the courtyard. Kale looked at everything with the same calm attention, and he remained silent. At dinner they sat across from each other. Kale ate neatly. He thanked them for the meal. Then he spoke. His voice was steady. quiet. He said that the Order had received intelligence about unusual activity in the Gray Frontier, that 10 bearers of the rarest classes had been discovered in a place where they shouldn't be, that the awakening of sealed classes without the Order's blessing was a violation of the Silver Canon, and that he was here to investigate, not to punish, to investigate. Raynar listened. Then he asked one thing. He asked if Kale knew who had sealed these 10. Kale paused. Then he replied that it was not within his jurisdiction. Raynar nodded. He said he understood, and that he would show Kale everything he wanted to see, with no secrets, because there was nothing to hide. Kale stayed for 3 days. Raynar did not restrict his movements. Go wherever you want, talk to whomever you want, ask whatever you want. Kale took full advantage of this. He spoke with each of the 10, one by one, politely, without pressure. He asked questions about the classes, about the awakening, about Raynar. Raynar knew the content of every conversation through the shared link, not the words, the emotions. He sensed when Sunny tensed up, when May started to get angry, when Cassandra was barely holding back the urge to grab her sword. But none of them broke. None of them got scared. They answered, calmly, honestly, because there was nothing to hide. On the second day, Kale visited the school. Yuno was teaching a class for the village children, 12 students, ages 6 to 14. Yuno was explaining how the system works, not according to the Silver Canon, based on her own observations. She said that potential isn't a sentence, that a level can be raised if the right conditions are there, that a class can be unlocked if a person finds their place. Kale stood in the doorway and listened. His expression didn't change, but Raynar noticed how his fingers tightened around his gloves. Kale approached Raynar after class. He asked if he believed what the girl was saying. Raynar replied that he didn't believe it. He knew, because he'd seen it 10 times over the past 9 months. Kale nodded. Then he asked the question Raynar had been waiting for. He asked how Raynar removed the seals, what ritual, what spell, what power he uses. Raynar answered simply. He said there was no ritual. He feeds people, calls them by name, builds a home for them, asks what they think, lets them do what they were born to do. That's all. Kale was silent. Then he said that was impossible, that the removal of seals is described in the Silver Canon. It requires prayer, purification, the blessing of the high priest. Raynar shrugged. He said that perhaps the canon was wrong. Kale looked at him as if Raynar had spat on the altar, but he said nothing. On the third day, Kale asked to see Leah's forge. Raynar led him there. Leah was working. The hammer moved steadily. The metal sang under the blows. Kale watched the process. Then he approached the finished blade on the stand. He reached out his hand. He paused. He turned to Leah and asked for permission. Leah looked up at him. She was half a head taller than Kale. She nodded. Kale took the blade. He ran his finger along the edge. His eyes widened. Raynar saw it. Kale was an experienced warrior. He had held thousands of blades in his hands, and he knew that what he was holding now was unlike any of them. Kale put the blade back. He thanked Leah. He went out. Raynar followed him. Kale stopped in the courtyard. He stood and looked out at the city. Children were running home from school, laughing. A woman was carrying a basket of bread from the bakery. A man was repairing a fence and whistling. May stood at the entrance to the infirmary and was talking to an old woman from Old Ford. Sunny was training with Irene on the practice ground. Their swords clanged evenly and cleanly. Ariel sat on the roof cleaning her bow. Nora was nowhere to be seen, somewhere along the perimeter. Kyle turned to Raynar. His face was calm, his voice steady. He said he had seen enough, that his report would be sent to the Order in a week, and that he wanted to ask one last question. Raynar nodded. Kale asked why. Why was Raynar Falk, a level 1 without a combat class, without an army, without allies, building a city on the edge of the Cursed Lands for people whom the whole world had written off? Raynar thought for 5 seconds. Then he answered. He said there was a saying from his past, that the value of a factory isn't determined by the cost of the machines, but by whether the people behind them are allowed to drink water and use the restroom without permission. Cale didn't understand. Raynar explained. He said that the value of the Wayland system isn't determined by the maximum levels of heroes, but by what happens to those whom the system to level 3 and the laundry class. If they're being thrown away, it means the system isn't working. It's not the people who are broken, the system is broken. He isn't going to break the system. He intends to show that it can work differently. Kyle was silent for a long time. Then he nodded. He mounted his horse. His soldiers fell into line. Before turning his horse around, Kyle said one more thing. He said that Raynar Falk was either the greatest heretic he had ever met, or the only person in this kingdom who understood the system correctly, and that he hadn't yet decided which of the two it was. Raynar replied that he had time to think. Cale almost smiled. Almost, and rode off. Raynar stood at the gate and watched the white cloaks disappear over the hill. Cassandra stood beside him. She was silent. Then she said quietly that he would return. Raynar replied that he knew. The question was what he would return with an answer or with an army. The week after Cale's departure was spent working. Raynar made use of every hour. The city walls were being reinforced. Leah was forging weapons and armor. Cassandra was training the city militia out of the new residents. 30 people, levels 5 to 15. Not soldiers, but with the right training and a learning curve, they would become fighters within a month. Ariel was training 4 hunters from the villagers. Nora had set up a network of observation posts around the city within a 5-league radius. Every movement was recorded. May expanded the infirmary. Now it had 10 beds. She taught 2 women from Old Ford basic medicine, skill transfer via Raynar. He demonstrated the procedure. The system transmitted the skill. May checked the quality, a conveyor belt of knowledge. Raynar watched this and thought that here, in this medieval world on the edge of the cursed lands, he had finally built what he had dreamed of at the factory in Seattle. A learning organization. A place where everyone teaches everyone else and everyone grows. Autumn had returned. The leaves on the gnarled trees of the gray boundary had turned yellow and fallen. A year had passed since the day the wagon brought Raynar to Dorn Hollow. A year. Raynar stood in that very spot by the gate where the driver had thrown a bunch of keys into the mud. The mud was gone. Stone. A clean stone. A wrought iron gate bearing the Hope Landing coat of arms. Una had drawn the coat of arms, an anvil and an open book. Leah had forged it onto the gate. Raynar had stared at that coat of arms for a long time when he first saw it. An anvil and a book. Strength and knowledge. Leah and Una, his 2 hands, right and left. The town was alive. 153 people. A blacksmith shop, a mill, a school for 30 children, a 10-bed infirmary, a bakery, Vivian's sewing workshop, 2 bridges, 3 wells, a stone wall around the entire perimeter, a deepened and widened moat, several lookout posts, patrols, a trade route to the lake rift where a 5-person fishing cooperative now operated. Doran the merchant had established a caravan route to the nearest highway. Leah's goods went east and returned with grain, cloth, and silver. Levels 10. Sunny 58, May 49, Ariel 53, Leah 51, Una 40, Cassandra 47, Irene 43, Nora 45, Hannah 41, Vivian 38, average 46. Higher than Kronheim's elite guard, and they kept growing every day. Raynar could see from the project map that the curves weren't slowing down. On the contrary, the higher the level, the more effectively the learning curve worked. Like compound interest. In 6 months, they'll be at 70. In a year, at 90. A winter evening. A long table in the main hall of Hopeland. Everyone is at the table. 10 girls. A blacksmith from Old Ford with his wife. Headman Hagen with his daughter. Doran the merchant. 2 orphaned children they had taken in along the road in the spring, a man from the militia with his family. 26 people. Hot food was steaming, the bread was fresh, the candles burned steadily. Raynar stood up, with a mug in his hand, and he began to speak. Not a speech, a roll call. He called each one by name and said one sentence about what that person had done over the past year. Sunny never dropped her sword once, even though she could have. May saved 16 lives. He counted. Leah forged the gate that withstood the battering ram. Ariel fed the city when it seemed there would be no food. Yuna built a school where 30 children are learning to read. Cassandra taught 100 people to stand in formation. Nora, not a single enemy approached the walls unnoticed. Irene danced in the square on the day of the summer solstice, and the whole city stopped to watch. Hannah baked bread that smelled like home. Vivian clothed the city. Then he moved on to the others. Hagen wasn't afraid to be the first to arrive. Graham dug a trench when he could have just walked away. Doran brought fabric and stayed because he saw the future. Of everyone, by name, one sentence. When he got to Cassandra, when he said she taught the whole town to stand up for themselves. For the first time in public, she wiped her eyes with her sleeve. Quickly, discreetly, almost. But Sunny saw, and May saw, and neither of them looked away. Because in this room, it was okay to cry. Raynar sat down. Silence. Then Sunny raised her mug. She said quietly, "To Hope Landing." 26 mugs rose. Raynar watched and felt, through the common bond, 10 waves of warmth. Not heat, not fire. That quiet, steady warmth that holds walls together tighter than any mortar. 3 days later, Nora reported. An army, coming from the west along the road, a blue banner with a silver ring. Baron Victor Holland. But not 5 horsemen like last time. 150 soldiers, 20 knights, siege ladders, 3 wagons with supplies. This wasn't a reconnaissance. This was war. Raynar called a council. The project map unfolded on the table. Red dots crept along the road. Yuna counted. 170 combat units, average level 18. Knights from 25 to 35. Commander, level 38, probably Holland himself. Against them, 10 girls with an average level of 46, 30 militiamen with an average of 12. Walls, a moat, traps. Cassandra laid out the tactics. They wouldn't withstand a direct assault. 150 against 40, the numbers are overwhelming. But they have the advantage in levels and in defense. Stone walls, a moat with stakes, a narrow gate. If they force Holland to launch a frontal assault, his losses will be so great that he will retreat. Raynar listened. Then he shook his head. He said that an assault was the last resort. He didn't want to kill Holland's soldiers. They weren't monsters from the forest. They were people. They had families. They're following the Baron's orders. Raynar wants them to get out alive. Cassandra objected that Holland wouldn't let them leave alive. Raynar replied that Holland isn't a fool. He's a baron. A baron counts his losses. If we show him that the cost of victory is higher than the value of the Grey Frontier, he'll retreat. Not out of kindness, out of calculation. The plan was simple. Nora and Ariel at the front lines. Slow down the march, traps on the road, fire from the woods. Don't kill, intimidate. Every delay is a blow to morale. Soldiers marching down a road where arrows fly from every bush lose their fighting spirit long before they reach the walls. Sunny and Cassandra on the walls, out in the open. Let them see. 2 warriors, levels 58 and 47, in full armor crafted by Leah, on the walls of a city that has no intention of surrendering. Irene at the gates, a level 43 blade dancer. If anyone breaks through, she'll meet them. Raynar on the wall, as always, the dispatcher, the project map, coordination. Not a single wasted movement, not a single fighter out of place. Holland's army reached Hopeland on the third day. Ariel and Nora did their job. Of the 150 soldiers, 13 were wounded by arrows in the legs. Not fatal, painful. Another 20 were lost in traps. Pits, traps, landslides on narrow sections of the road. Just over 100 approached the walls. No siege ladders. 2 out of 3 had broken on the landslides. Holland. Raynar saw him from the tower, a large man in a blue cloak, level 38, Knight Commander class, his face red with anger. Sir Davis was beside him, the very same one, level 24 now. He's grown over the past year. His face is pale. He's been here before. He knew what lay beyond the walls. Holland halted the army. He looked at the walls. He saw figures, numbers above their heads. Sunny, 58. Cassandra, 47. Irene, 43. His face changed. He had come to crush a crumbling fort with a dozen slave girls. He saw a fortress with warriors whose levels surpassed his own. Raynar went down to the gates. He stepped out, alone. Cassandra hissed. Raynar didn't stop. He crossed the bridge over the moat, stood before the army. Level 1, unarmed, unarmored. In the cloak Vivian had sewn for him 6 months ago. Holland looked down at him from his horse. Raynar spoke, quietly, calmly, as if negotiating with a client. He said that Hope Landing wasn't looking for war with Baron Holland, that the trade proposal he'd sent a year ago was still on the table, that he understood the Baron wanted land. But land without people was worth nothing, and the people of Hope Landing weren't going anywhere. If Holland wants to storm the walls, let him do the math. His best knights are level 35. Level 58 warriors stand on the walls. A storming is possible. Victory is not. And every soldier who falls at these walls is a soldier Holland won't be able to post on his own wall when the next wave of beasts comes from the Whispering Forest. And it will come. It comes every winter. Holland listened. His expression changed. The anger faded. Calculation took its place. Raynar saw it. The Baron was calculating. Raynar knew that look. That's the look of a man who understands the numbers aren't in his favor, but doesn't want to admit it publicly. Raynar took another step. He didn't propose a trade, an alliance. Hope Landing would take on the defense of the western border against the creatures. Holland would leave Hope Landing alone and receive safe trade routes through the gray boundary. Mutual benefit, put in writing. Raynar pulled a scroll from his bosom, a scroll, already written. Una had drafted it 3 days ago. When Raynar first heard of Holland's march, Holland looked at the scroll, then at the walls, then at Raynar. Level 1, standing before an army unarmed and holding out a treaty. Holland dismounted. He took the scroll. He read it for a long time. Then he looked at Davis. Davis nodded almost imperceptibly. Holland took out a quill. He signed it. He turned his horse around and led his army away, without a single blow. Raynar stood before the empty road. His legs were shaking. His hands were shaking. He clasped them behind his back so no one would see. Cassandra approached from behind. She placed a hand on his shoulder. She said nothing. She just stood beside him. Winter of the second year. Hopeland had become a city visible from afar. Stone walls, 4 towers, smoke rose in steady plumes from the chimneys. The roads were cleared. The bridges were fortified. The population was 210. Caravans passed through every 2 weeks. Torin the merchant had expanded his operations. Leah's blacksmith goods were bought all along the western frontier. Vivian's fabrics were ordered from neighboring baronies. Una's school had taken in 50 students. May's infirmary treated not only townspeople, but also peasants from all over the region. Hopeland was no longer a place of exile. It had become a place people aspired to. Raynar worked every day, planning meetings in the morning, city rounds in the afternoon, council in the evening. The project map glowed before his eyes constantly. 210 points, each with its own status. He knew every resident by name, knew who was sick, who was tired, who was in conflict with a neighbor. The common link provided him with 10 channels of constant information from his 10 subordinates. But the city was more than 10. The city was 210, and Raynar carried it all on his level 1 shoulders. May was the first to notice. One morning she walked into the council chamber and saw Raynar at the table. He'd fallen asleep over the maps. His face was gray, dark circles under his eyes. His hands were trembling even in his sleep. May sat down next to him. She placed her hand on his forehead. Cold. She checked his pulse. Weak, irregular. A level 53 life healer knew what she was seeing. Exhaustion. Not physical, systemic. Territory seal, shared link. 10 seals removed. Each skill was taking its toll, little by little, constantly. Raynar was burning out like a candle at both ends, and he didn't tell anyone. May didn't wake him. She went to Cassandra, then to Yuna. An hour later, all 10 knew. Raynar was giving himself away piece by piece and didn't say a word, because that's how he was built. Because an engineer doesn't complain about his tools. He works until the tool breaks, and then he works without the tool. They gathered without him, for the first time in a year. 10 women in the infirmary. May explained the situation. Yuna did the math. If the drain on his life force continued at the same rate, Raynar would lose 10 to 15 years of his life over the next year. For a level 1, that's critical. He has no regeneration, no magical protection. He's an ordinary person with an extraordinary class, and that class is killing him. Cassandra said we need to lighten his load. Not all of it, that's impossible, but part of it. Yuna can take over city coordination, Cassandra, defense, May, medicine, trade, Doran, supplies, Ariel. Each will take their own area. Raynar will remain a mentor, a strategist, but he won't have to carry everything alone. Sunny was silent throughout the conversation. Then she stood up and left. She found Raynar in the council hall. He was already awake, sitting there rubbing his eyes. Sunny sat down across from him. She looked at him and said what she had never said before. She said that he had taught them to stand on their own 2 feet, that he had given each of them a name, a place, and a purpose, and that now it was their turn. That he shouldn't have to carry everything on his own, that they weren't slaves who needed protecting. They were his team, and a team works both ways. Raynar looked at her, at the girl who, a year ago, wouldn't look him in the eye, who cried into her bowl of porridge, who was afraid of her own name. Now, sitting before him was a level 62 sword saint, with her back straight, with clear eyes, and she was telling him the truth he didn't want to hear. He agreed. Not right away, not easily. The engineer inside him resisted. Delegation was the hardest skill for Raynar, not because he didn't know how, because he was afraid. He was afraid that without his control something would go wrong, that someone would get hurt, that he would let them down. But Sunny was looking at him, and he remembered the rule he used to drill into the foremen's heads at the factory in Seattle. If you're indispensable, you're a bad leader. A good leader builds a system that works without him. The reassignment took a week. Yuna took administration, Cassandra took defense, May took medicine, Ariel took supply and intelligence, Leah took production, Nora took security, Irene took training, Hannah took logistics, Vivian took civilian needs, Sunny took on what no one else could. She became Raynar's shadow, not a bodyguard, a partner. She was there when he got tired. She made sure he ate, slept, didn't push himself too hard. She did it quietly, unobtrusively, so Raynar didn't always notice. But he noticed more and more often. One evening, the 2 of them sat on the roof of the tower, the stars of Wayland, foreign constellations, a familiar sky. Sunny was silent. Raynar was silent. Then she said that a year ago, in the wagon, she thought she was going to die, that she would be sold and resold, and one day she would just stop, like a broken thing. And then someone called her by name and gave her a bowl of porridge, and the whole world changed. Raynar turned to her. He wanted to say that he was just doing his job, but he didn't, because that would have been a lie. It had long since ceased to be work. He didn't know when. Maybe when she first smiled. Maybe when she stood in formation with a sword. Maybe when she told him the truth to his face today. He didn't say anything. He just sat there beside her, and that was enough for both of them. 2 weeks later, a second letter arrived from Kronheim. Not from the Chancellor, from the royal court, an embassy, an official one. 10 horsemen, 2 advisors, 1 herald. They would arrive in a month, with an order to return the lands of the Grey Frontier to the crown. Raynar read it. He showed it to Cassandra. She read it. She looked at him. He looked at her. They both knew what it meant. The next stage. The capital had moved from paper to action. Raynar convened a grand council, all 10, Elder Hagen, Doran, the militia commanders. He laid out the situation. An embassy in a month. Formally diplomatic, in reality an ultimatum. Behind the embassy stood those who had trafficked Category C people, those who had gathered groups of 10 and sent them to their deaths. They finally realized that their bomb hadn't exploded. It had gone off. Yuna presented the information she had been gathering for months, through Doran, through traffickers, through letters. The 10 girls had not been gathered by chance. They had been sought across the entire continent, each with a potential of 99, each of the rarest class. They had been searched for years, found, branded, and sent to the ends of the earth. Not killed. Murder leaves traces. They exiled them to places from which there is no return. Dorn Hollow was one such place. Yuna hadn't determined exactly who was behind it, but the clues led to one person, the Supreme Chancellor of Astrana, Lord Marcus Dane. Raynar listened. The pieces were falling into place. The Chancellor who had rejected the petition, the Chancellor who was now sending an embassy, the Chancellor who had spent years gathering and disposing of people with a 99 potential. Why? Yuna answered. Because the Wayland system had been rewritten 300 years ago. The ceilings are set too low for most. People with a 99 potential are remnants of the old version. If they are awakened, they prove that the system can work differently. And if the system can work differently, then the entire hierarchy collapses. All the power built on numbers above their heads loses its meaning. The silence in the hall was thick. Raynar looked at 10 faces. 10 women whom someone up there wanted to dispose of, who had been gathered into a single group and sent to die with a worthless little nobleman. And this young nobleman turned out not to be who he seemed. And he didn't die. And he didn't let them die. Raynar stood up. He said they would accept the embassy, with a dinner, with courtesy, with documents, and with 10 figures on the walls, each with a number above their head that would make any ambassador pale. He has no intention of going to war with the capital. He intends to show that the system works, that people are growing, that Hopeland is standing, and that returning this land to the crown is possible only over the corpses of those who live on it. And there will be no corpses, because he, Raynar Falk, Level 1, did not build this city to have it destroyed. The embassy arrived on the first day of winter, 10 horsemen in royal colors, 2 advisors in black robes, a herald with a staff, and among them, Raynar saw from the wall and clenched his fists, a man in a white cloak, silver hair, straight back. Sir Augustin Kyle, level 75. He had returned, with an answer or with an army. Raynar watched and could not read the answer from a distance. The gates opened. Raynar met the embassy in the courtyard. Cassandra was beside him, behind her, Sunny. On the walls, Ariel, Nora, Irene. By the smithy, Leah with a hammer on her shoulder. By the infirmary, May. By the school, Una. Each in her place, each visible, each with a number above her head. The ambassador, Lord Edmund Thorne, Crown Advisor, level 41. His face is sharp, his eyes are quick. He dismounted. He looked around. He saw the city. He saw the numbers. Raynar noticed his pupils constrict. He was counting, just as Davis had counted a year ago, just as Cale had counted 6 months ago, just as Holland had counted. Everyone was counting, because in Wayland, everything began with numbers. Cale dismounted last. He looked at Raynar. He nodded. His face was inscrutable. Raynar nodded back. There was something between them that words couldn't convey. Two people who had already spoken and hadn't finished. Raynar led the embassy through the city. A long route, as always. Past the smithy, the sound of Leah's hammer. Past the school, the voices of children. Past the infirmary, the scent of herbs. Past the training ground, the clang of swords. Past the bakery, the smell of bread. Thorne watched and said nothing. His face betrayed nothing. A professional diplomat. But Raynar saw what the diplomat was hiding. Confusion. Thorne had come here with an order and an expectation. The order was to reclaim the lands. The expectation was to find ruins with a handful of ragged survivors. He found a city. At dinner, Thorne read the order aloud, officially, in front of witnesses. The lands of the Grey Frontier belong to the Crown. The settlement of Hope Landing has no legal status. Lord Falk is ordered to transfer control to a governor appointed by the Crown. The residents are guaranteed safety on condition of submission. Raynar listened. Then he asked to speak. Thorne nodded. Raynar stood up. And he didn't start with laws, not with arguments. He started with a question. He asked Thorne if he had seen the smithy. Thorne replied that he had. Raynar asked if he had seen the school. Thorne replied that he had. Raynar asked if he had seen the infirmary. Thorne replied that he had. Raynar nodded and said that all of this had been built by people the Crown had written off. Category C. Slaves. Disposable. Level 3. Laundry class. They were sent here to die, not because they were useless, because someone up there knew they weren't useless, knew they had a potential of 99, and was afraid. Silence. Thorne looked at Raynar. Cale looked at Raynar. Everyone looked at Raynar. Raynar continued. He said he knew about Chancellor Marcus Dane. He knew that for years the Chancellor had been gathering people with a potential of 99 and sending them to places from which there is no return. He knew that the Wayland system had been rewritten 300 years ago, that the ceilings for most people were artificially lowered, that the 10 women in this room were proof of that. Living, standing, breathing. Una handed Thorne a tablet. It had everything on it. Names, levels before and after, dates the seals were removed, methods, results, the documented history of each one. Thorne took the tablet. He read it for a long time. His face changed. It paled. Raynar saw it. Thorne didn't know. The Crown Advisor didn't know about the disposal program. The Chancellor had been acting behind the court's back. Thorne looked up. He looked at Cale. Cale nodded. With a single gesture, he confirmed it. Raynar understood. Cale knew. Cale had already known when he left 6 months ago, and he hadn't returned with an army. He returned with the truth. The report he wrote didn't just go to the Order. It went to the King, bypassing the Chancellor. That is exactly why Thorne is here. Not because Dane sent him, because the King sent him. To check. Raynar turned to Cale. The Inquisitor was standing by the wall, straightforward, calm. Their eyes met. Raynar asked. He asked what Cale had written in the report. Cale paused, then he answered. He said he had written the truth, that he had seen a city built on care, that he had seen weapons forged with love, that he had seen a school where they teach people to think, not to obey, that he saw an infirmary where everyone was treated, and that he found no heresy in not a single room, in not a single person. He looked diligently and found none. Raynar nodded. Then he turned to Thorn and offered not submission, not confrontation, partnership. Hopeland becomes a free city under the protection of the crown, not under its rule, under its protection. It pays taxes, it obeys the laws, but it is governed by the code that Raynar wrote. In return, Hopeland does two things. First, it guards the western border against the creatures of the Whispering Forest. 10 warriors with an average level of 50 and rising. No baron, no duke can offer such protection. Second, Yuna's school opens to everyone. Anyone from any corner of Astrain can come and study, to discover their true potential, to unlock their class, to grow. Hopelanding is not a threat to the crown. Hopelanding is the solution to a problem the crown has been unable to solve for 3 centuries. Thorn thought. For a long time. Then he said he couldn't make a decision for the king, but he could make a recommendation, and that the recommendation would be positive, on one condition. He wanted to see proof, one piece, here, now, that Raynar Falk really does what he claims. Raynar looked at May. May nodded. She left. She returned a minute later. She was leading a boy by the hand, 8 years old, the son of one of the militiamen. Level 2, class unassigned. A child, an ordinary child. Raynar walked over to him, dropped to one knee, activated true status. It flickered above the boy's head. Potential 44. True class, builder. Not 99, not a legend. An ordinary child with ordinary potential. Raynar turned to Thorn and said that according to the laws of the system, this boy would remain level 2 for the rest of his life, because his class has not been awakened, because no one knows he's a builder, because he's the son of a militiaman in the Grey Frontier, and no one will give him a second glance. But if you give him a teacher, tools, and time, in a year he'll be level 20. In 5 years, 44. And he'll build houses and bridges and walls. Not because the system forced him to, because someone looked and saw. Raynar placed his hand on the boy's shoulder and called him by name. Toma. Your name is Toma. You are a builder. That means you will build. The boy looked up at him. He didn't understand everything, but he felt it. Raynar saw the seal tremble, a faint one, not as deep as the one on a 10-year-old, but real. It cracked. The system updated. Builder class. Level available for growth from 1 to 44. Thorn saw it. Kayleigh saw it. Everyone saw it. The boy who a second ago was a nobody had become someone, with a single word, a single touch, a single name. Thorn stood up. His face was different. Not that of a diplomat, that of a man. He said the recommendation would be positive, without a doubt, and that he would personally report to the king, and that if Chancellor Dane tried to interfere, Thorn would make sure the report reached the throne first. The embassy left 2 days later, with a copy of the Hopelanding Codex, with Yuna's notes, with Thorn's personal impressions, and with Kale's report. Kale was the last to leave. He stopped his horse at the gate. He looked down at Raynar, and said he had made a decision. That Raynar Falk was not a heretic, that he was the only person in this kingdom who understood the system correctly, and that the Order would learn of this from his report. Raynar asked what would happen next. Kale replied that things would get interesting, and rode off, with the shadow of a smile on his face. Raynar stood at the gate. Behind him stood the city, 210 people, walls, towers, smoke from the chimneys. Beyond the gates, a road stretched toward the horizon, toward the capital, toward the king, toward the future. Raynar turned around. They were waiting for him in the courtyard, all 10 of them, in identical dark gray cloaks with white trim, standing in a line. not by order, out of habit, because this is their formation, their city, their home. Sunny stood first, a level 65 sword saint, a 14-year-old girl who, a year ago, had been crying into a bowl of porridge. She looked at Raynar and said quietly, "Lord, dinner is getting cold." Raynar smiled, for the first time in a long time. Not an engineer's calculated smile, a real one. He walked toward them, toward his table, toward his city, toward his people. Level 1, forever. And that was enough. Because the number above your head doesn't determine a person's worth. Worth is determined by what you've built, who you've lifted up, who you've given a name to. And they went to dinner, all together, like a family.